Good evening. Let me tell you about the paradox that almost went undiscovered. In 1974, a psychoanalyst in New York began documenting something that shouldn't have been possible. The most passionate volunteers at his free clinic, people who'd arrived burning with idealism, who worked longer hours than required, who cared more deeply than anyone asked them to, were systematically destroying themselves. But not in the way you'd expect. Here's what made this truly bizarre. When researchers later studied people in this state, they found their stress hormones weren't elevated. They were suppressed. These individuals had pushed so hard for so long that their bodies had essentially given up trying to respond to stress. It was as if their internal alarm systems had burned out from constant activation. The volunteers weren't just exhausted, they were changing. Compassionate caregivers became cold and detached. Dedicated idealists became cynical. People who'd been exceptionally competent began making mistakes they'd never made before. And the psychoanalyst documenting all of this? He was experiencing it himself. His name was Herbert Freudenberger, and he'd just identified something that would reshape how we understand modern work, a condition that recent surveys suggest now affects approximately 89% of US workers at some point within a given year, costs the US economy alone over $500 billion annually through lost productivity and healthcare expenses, and contributes to an estimated 120,000 deaths per year in the United States through stress-related cardiovascular disease and other health complications. He called it burnout. But here's what almost no one understands about burnout. It's not what we think it is. It's not laziness. It's not weakness. It's not an inability to cope with normal stress. Based on decades of research since Freudenberger's discovery, burnout appears to be something far more unsettling, a protective mechanism. Your body and mind forcing you to stop when you won't stop voluntarily. Tonight, we're going to explore why the people who care most are the ones who burn out. Why your body's stress response can actually shut down from trying too hard. Why being good at your job might make you more vulnerable, not less. And why understanding burnout might reveal something fundamental about what modern work demands from us, and what happens when those demands exceed what human beings were designed to give. We'll trace this phenomenon from Freudenberger's clinic in the 1970s to laboratories measuring cortisol levels, from boardrooms where organizational changes are implemented to therapy offices where individuals seek recovery. We'll discover why burnout research kept producing contradictory results until scientists realized they were capturing different stages of the same biological progression. We'll explore how the three dimensions of burnout create vicious cycles that amplify each other, and we'll confront research findings that challenge our entire approach to workplace well-being. But most importantly, by the end of tonight, you'll understand something that changes everything. What we've been calling a disorder might actually be information. What looks like personal failure might be accurate feedback. And what we've been trying to fix in individuals might actually be revealing what's broken in our systems. Take a slow breath. Get comfortable. This is a journey worth taking carefully. Let's begin. Take a breath. You're not alone in this. Far from it. Here's the first surprising truth about burnout. It doesn't strike the lazy or uncommitted. Research consistently shows that burnout is most common among the most dedicated workers, the ones who care deeply, who work hardest, who feel the strongest sense of responsibility. This suggests something counterintuitive. Burnout isn't about doing too little. It's about giving too much for too long, without adequate resources to sustain it. Burnout has become one of the defining experiences of contemporary work life, affecting nearly half of all workers globally at some point in their careers. In the United States alone, Recent surveys found that 89% of employees reported experiencing burnout within the past year. Among healthcare workers during the COVID-19 pandemic, rates reached as high as 70%. But understanding what burnout truly is, where it comes from, and most importantly, how we might find our way through it, requires us to slow down and look carefully at this phenomenon that has captured the attention of psychologists, physicians, and policymakers worldwide. The World Health Organization, in its International Classification of Diseases, 11th revision, which came into official use in 2022, describes burnout as a syndrome conceptualized as resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed. It's characterized by 3 dimensions: feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job, and reduced professional efficacy. What's particularly striking is what the WHO clarifies. Burnout is classified as an occupational phenomenon rather than a medical condition. It sits in that interesting space between health and work, between the personal and the professional, between who we are and what we do. This matters because it shifts the question. If burnout isn't primarily a medical condition, but an occupational one, then perhaps it's not individuals who need fixing, it's workplaces. But here's what makes burnout truly alarming. Recent research found that 70% of burned-out employees would leave their current company for one offering better support and burnout prevention resources. Organizations lose their most experienced workers not to better opportunities elsewhere, but to escape from burnout. The economic cost? Over $500 billion annually in the United States alone, with 550 million workdays lost to work-related stress each year. These aren't just numbers. They represent millions of people waking up exhausted, dreading their days, feeling trapped in situations that are slowly consuming them. But burnout is more than a list of symptoms in a diagnostic manual. It's the experience of watching yourself become someone you don't quite recognize. It's the slow erosion of enthusiasm, the gradual dimming of motivation, the creeping sense that you're going through motions rather than living with purpose. It's waking up tired despite sleeping, feeling overwhelmed by tasks that once seemed manageable, and noticing a growing cynicism that colors your thoughts about work, colleagues, and sometimes even yourself. This isn't about ordinary tiredness or normal job stress. We all have difficult days, challenging weeks, even tough months. Burnout is different. It's chronic, persistent, and deeply affecting. It changes how you think, how you feel, and how you engage with the world around you. Tonight, we're going to take our time exploring this landscape together. We'll trace the history of how burnout was first recognized and named, understanding the journey from a clinician's personal observations in the 1970s to a globally recognized phenomenon studied by researchers across continents. We'll delve into the fascinating and sometimes troubling science of what happens in your body when stress becomes chronic, how your nervous system responds, and why some people seem more vulnerable than others. We'll examine the 3 core dimensions that define burnout, understanding how emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and reduced efficacy interact and compound one another. We'll look closely at the risk factors, both individual and organizational, that create the conditions for burnout to take root. We'll explore how workplace cultures, leadership styles, and organizational structures can either protect against burnout or inadvertently foster it. We'll trace the progression of burnout, understanding how it develops over time, what the warning signs are at each stage, and when the tipping point typically occurs. We'll confront the consequences, both immediate and long-term, on physical health, mental well-being, relationships, and career trajectories. We'll discuss how burnout is recognized and assessed, distinguishing it from other conditions it might resemble. And most importantly, we'll explore pathways to recovery and prevention. We'll examine evidence-based treatments, from cognitive behavioral therapy to mindfulness-based interventions, and we'll consider both individual strategies and organizational changes that can make a real difference. We'll talk about resilience, not as some magical quality that only special people possess, but as a set of learnable skills and supportive conditions that can help us navigate the demands of modern work without losing ourselves in the process. This is a journey worth taking slowly, with attention and care. Because burnout isn't just a personal problem or an individual failing. It's a window into how we work, how we live, and what happens when the demands placed upon us exceed our resources for meeting them. Understanding burnout helps us understand ourselves, our workplaces, and potentially how we might create conditions for sustainable, meaningful work. So take another breath, get comfortable, and let's begin this exploration together, moving gently through the science, the histories, and the strategies that might help us understand one of the most pressing psychological challenges of our time. The birth of a concept, how burnout was discovered. To understand burnout, we need to go back to where it all began. The year was 1974, and a German-American psychoanalyst named Herbert Freudenberger was working at a free clinic in New York City. These were tumultuous times. The aftermath of the Vietnam War, the shadow of Watergate, economic uncertainty rippling through American society. Freudenberger ran a clinic that served marginalized populations, and he worked alongside dedicated volunteers and staff members who poured themselves into their work with remarkable commitment. But Freudenberger began noticing something troubling in himself and in the people around him. The passionate, energetic individuals who had arrived full of idealism and dedication were gradually changing. Over the course of a year or more, he observed them becoming exhausted, cynical, and emotionally depleted. Their enthusiasm waned. They began to treat the very people they were trying to help with coldness or detachment. Some developed physical symptoms, headaches, insomnia, gastrointestinal problems. Others simply withdrew, their presence at work becoming mechanical, their spark extinguished. Freudenberger recognized this pattern intimately because he was experiencing it himself. He described feeling like a building that had burned down, a structure that had once been vital and functional, now reduced to an empty shell. The lights were still on, but something essential had been consumed. He called this phenomenon burnout, borrowing a term that had actually appeared once before in the literature. In 1969, a researcher named Bradley had mentioned burnout briefly, just once, in quotation marks, when describing a time schedule designed to prevent it among staff running a program for young offenders. But Bradley provided no explanation or elaboration. Freudenberger was the first to truly elaborate on it, to give it shape and definition, drawing from his lived experience and clinical observations. In his 1974 paper published in the Journal of Social Issues, titled Staff Burnout, Freudenberger described burnout as a state of exhaustion that occurs in the internal resources of the individual as a result of failure, wear, decrease in energy and power, or unsatisfied desires. He was describing it qualitatively, almost poetically, from his lived experience and his observations as a clinician. His work resonated deeply with others in helping professions who recognized these patterns in themselves and their colleagues. But here's what could have happened. Freudenberger's observations might have remained merely clinical anecdotes, interesting but unverifiable. The concept could have faded into obscurity, dismissed as too vague or too subjective to study scientifically. Without a way to measure burnout reliably, it would have been nearly impossible to understand its causes, consequences, or potential solutions. This is where Christina Maslach enters the story, and her contribution would prove transformative. In 1976, Maslach published an article in Human Behavior magazine describing burnout among human service workers. She had been studying the ways that professionals in emotionally demanding jobs, psychiatrists, social workers, poverty lawyers, emergency room nurses, coped with the emotional stress of their work. Through interviews and observations, Maslach identified a consistent pattern. She noticed that burnout wasn't just one thing, it had multiple dimensions that tended to occur together. There was emotional exhaustion, the feeling of being emotionally overextended and depleted, of having nothing left to give. There was depersonalization, a cold, detached, even cynical response toward the people one was supposed to be helping. And there was reduced personal accomplishment, the feeling that one's work wasn't making a difference, that efforts were futile, that professional competence was diminishing. What made Maslach's contribution so significant was that she and her colleague Susan Jackson developed a way to measure these dimensions. In 1981, they published The Measurement of Experienced Burnout in the Journal of Occupational Behavior, introducing the Maslach Burnout Inventory, a questionnaire that assessed the 3 components of burnout systematically. This was a turning point. Now, burnout could be studied scientifically. Researchers could compare different occupational groups, track changes over time, evaluate interventions, and build a body of empirical evidence. The Maslach Burnout Inventory became, and remains, the most widely used tool for measuring burnout. Over the decades since its development, it has been translated into numerous languages and used in thousands of studies across the globe. It's been adapted for different occupational contexts. From the original focus on human services to versions for educators, for general workers, for students. By some estimates, over 6,000 works on burnout have been published, with roughly 1,000 new articles appearing each year on some aspect of this syndrome. The journey from Freudenberger's initial observations to Maslach's systematic measurement represents something important in psychology: the movement from clinical intuition to empirical investigation. Freudenberger saw burnout and lived it. Maslach operationalized it and made it studyable. Together, their work laid the foundation for decades of research that would follow. But the concept of burnout didn't develop in isolation. It emerged from and resonated with broader currents in society and psychology. The 1970s were a time of heightened attention to stress and its consequences. Hans Selye's work on the general adaptation syndrome, describing how organisms respond to stresses through alarm, resistance, and eventual exhaustion, provided a physiological framework. The concept of occupational stress was gaining traction, with researchers like Robert Karasek developing models of job strain that highlighted the interaction between job demands and worker control. The free clinic movement, where Freudenberger worked, was itself a product of the 1960s counterculture, representing a commitment to providing care to underserved populations outside of traditional medical establishments. The people drawn to this work were often idealists, motivated by strong values and a desire to make a difference. Perhaps this made the contrast between their initial enthusiasm and eventual depletion all the more stark. Freudenberger, influenced by psychoanalytic thinking, saw burnout through the lens of individual psychology and personal resources. He used metaphors of energy depletion, comparing people to batteries that could be drained. This mechanistic view, humans as energy systems that could be depleted through overuse, became one of the core metaphors that shaped early burnout research. Maslach, working from social psychology, emphasized the interpersonal context of burnout. She was particularly interested in how emotional labor, the requirement to display certain emotions regardless of what one actually felt, took its toll on workers. Her focus on depersonalization highlighted the way that burnout affected not just the individual, but their relationships with others, particularly those they were supposed to serve. Through the 1980s and 1990s, burnout research expanded beyond human service professions. Researchers began finding burnout among teachers, police officers, and clergy. Then it appeared in corporate settings, among managers and executives. Athletes experienced it. Students did too. It became clear that burnout wasn't confined to any particular occupation. Rather, it emerged wherever there was a mismatch between the person and their work environment, wherever demands consistently exceeded resources. Different cultures and countries brought their own perspectives to understanding burnout. In Europe, particularly in Scandinavian countries and the Netherlands, burnout became recognized as a legitimate reason for sick leave. Research groups in these regions contributed significantly to understanding workplace factors that contributed to or protected against burnout. In Japan, the concept of karoshi, death from overwork, highlighted extreme consequences of work-related stress. Different measurement tools were developed, like the Oldenburg Burnout Inventory and the Copenhagen Burnout Inventory, each emphasizing different aspects of the syndrome. In 2019, the World Health Organization's inclusion of burnout in the ICD-11 represented another milestone. The WHO's definition closely paralleled Maslach's 3 dimensions, but framed them in slightly updated language. Feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's job or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job, and a sense of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. The ICD-11 was released in June 2018 and came into official use in January 2022. Critically, the WHO clarified that burnout refers specifically to phenomena in the occupational context and should not be applied to experiences in other areas of life. The WHO explicitly states that burnout is classified as an occupational phenomenon rather than as a medical condition or mental disorder. This classification in ICD-11 places burnout under factors influencing health status or contact with health services, rather than under mental disorders, specifically with the code QD85. This clarification was important because it addressed ongoing debates about whether burnout was truly distinct from other conditions, particularly depression. Some researchers and clinicians argued that burnout was simply work-related depression or a pathway to depression. Others maintained that burnout had unique features: its specific connection to the work context, its particular combination of exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy that distinguished it from other mental health conditions. The debate continues in some ways. More than 140 different definitions of burnout have been proposed in the literature. The boundaries between burnout, chronic stress, depression, chronic fatigue syndrome, and other conditions remain areas of discussion and research. Different countries have taken different approaches to whether burnout should be recognized as a diagnosable condition for medical purposes. As of the early 2020s, 9 European countries, Denmark, Estonia, France, Hungary, Latvia, the Netherlands, Portugal, Slovakia, and Sweden, legally recognized burnout as an occupational disorder, providing workers' compensation to affected individuals. What makes this history compelling is how it reveals burnout as both a personal experience and a social phenomenon. Freudenberger's initial observations came from a particular time and place, shaped by the idealism and subsequent disillusionment of that era. But the concept resonated far beyond that specific context, because it named something many people were experiencing, but lacked language to describe. The development of measurement tools like the Maslach Burnout Inventory allowed burnout to be studied systematically, but it also shaped how we think about and experience burnout. When we have categories and scales to measure our exhaustion, cynicism, and sense of efficacy, we begin to understand our experience through those lenses. This isn't necessarily bad. Having language to describe our struggles can be validating and can help us seek appropriate support. But it's worth recognizing how the tools we use to study phenomena also shape the phenomena themselves. The recognition of burnout by organizations like the WHO legitimizes the experience and helps reduce stigma. It signals that burnout is a real condition with real consequences, not a sign of personal weakness or failure. But it also raises questions about responsibility. If burnout is an occupational phenomenon resulting from chronic workplace stress that has not been successfully managed, whose job is it to manage that stress? The individual worker? The organization? Society at large? These questions thread through all of burnout research and practice. They'll come up again and again as we explore the causes, consequences, and potential solutions to burnout. For now, it's enough to understand that burnout, as a concept, has a history. It emerged from specific observations, was shaped by particular theoretical perspectives, and has evolved through ongoing research and social recognition. From one psychoanalyst's observations in a free clinic in 1970s New York to a globally recognized syndrome studied by thousands of researchers and affecting hundreds of millions of workers, burnout has become one of the defining challenges of contemporary work life. Understanding its origins helps us appreciate both what we know about burnout and the questions that remain. The body under siege, the physiology of chronic stress. To truly understand burnout, we need to journey inside the body itself to see what happens at a biological level when stress becomes chronic and resources become depleted. This isn't just metaphorical exhaustion or psychological fatigue. Burnout has real, measurable physiological manifestations. Your body is responding to perceived threats and demands in ways that, over time, can affect nearly every system in your body. Let's start with the stress response system itself. Your body is equipped with an elegant, evolutionarily ancient system designed to help you respond to danger. When you perceive a threat, whether it's a predator, a physical danger, or in modern times, a looming deadline or an angry email from your boss, your body activates what's often called the fight or flight response. This response involves two main biological pathways. The first is rapid, the sympathetic adrenal medullary axis, or SAM axis. Within seconds of perceiving a stressor, your sympathetic nervous system activates, triggering the release of catecholamines, primarily epinephrine, also called adrenaline, and norepinephrine from the adrenal medulla. These stress hormones cause immediate changes. Your heart rate increases, your blood pressure rises, your pupils dilate, your breathing quickens. Blood is redirected away from your digestive system and toward your large muscles. You become alert, focused, ready to respond to the threat. This is the system that gives you that surge of energy in a crisis, that lets you think quickly and move fast when you need to. It's designed for acute stress, for short-term threats that require immediate action, and it works beautifully for that purpose. The second pathway is slower but more sustained, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis. This system involves a cascade of hormonal releases. The hypothalamus, a small but crucial structure at the base of your brain, releases corticotropin-releasing hormone, or CRH. This travels to the pituitary gland, which then releases adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, into your bloodstream. ACTH travels to your adrenal glands, sitting atop your kidneys, stimulating them to produce glucocorticoids, particularly cortisol. Cortisol is often called the stress hormone, and for good reason. It plays a central role in how your body manages prolonged stress. Cortisol mobilizes energy resources, making glucose available to fuel your muscles and brain. It modulates immune function, dampening inflammation. It affects memory consolidation and emotional processing. It has receptors throughout your body, influencing nearly every major organ system. In acute stress, cortisol is adaptive. It gives you sustained energy to deal with challenges. But cortisol follows a natural daily rhythm called a circadian rhythm. Normally, cortisol levels are highest in the morning, shortly after waking. This is what helps you feel alert and ready to start your day. Levels gradually decline throughout the day, reaching their lowest point in the middle of the night. This pattern, called the cortisol awakening response, is a marker of a healthy, well-functioning HPA axis. But when stress becomes chronic, this elegant system can become dysregulated. And this is where things get interesting and concerning in relation to burnout. Research on the biological correlates of burnout has focused heavily on the HPA axis, particularly on cortisol. The initial hypothesis seemed straightforward. If burnout results from prolonged exposure to stress, and stress activates the HPA axis leading to elevated cortisol, then people experiencing burnout should show elevated cortisol levels. This would fit with the allostatic load model, which suggests that chronic stress creates a cumulative burden on bodily systems. But the reality turned out to be more complex and more surprising. Studies on cortisol levels in burnout have yielded mixed and sometimes contradictory findings. Some research found elevated basal cortisol levels in people with burnout. Other studies found normal levels. Still others found reduced cortisol levels, a phenomenon called hypocortisolism. Here's the paradox. You might expect that people under chronic stress would have consistently elevated cortisol, but that's not always what researchers found. Instead, the data suggests a more complex pattern, one that challenges our intuitive understanding of stress. This hypocortisolism hypothesis proposes something unexpected. After prolonged activation of the HPA axis during chronic stress, the system may eventually become exhausted or downregulated. Instead of responding robustly to stressors with appropriate cortisol release, the HPA axis becomes blunted, producing insufficient cortisol. Based on this pattern, researchers have inferred that this hypoactivity might explain some of the symptoms of burnout, particularly the profound exhaustion. If your body can't mobilize the energy resources it needs because cortisol production is impaired, you would feel persistently fatigued. No amount of rest would restore that biological capacity to respond. Some studies have found evidence supporting hypocortisolism in burnout. Research has shown that people with burnout may have flattened cortisol awakening responses. Their morning cortisol surge is less pronounced. Some studies have found lower cortisol levels throughout the day in burned-out individuals compared to controls. Others have found that people with burnout show enhanced suppression of cortisol in response to dexamethasone, a synthetic glucocorticoid used in testing to evaluate HPA axis function. This pattern suggests increased sensitivity of glucocorticoid receptors, which could lead to excessive negative feedback and suppression of cortisol production. However, and this is where the story becomes even more intriguing, other research has failed to find consistent evidence of hypocortisolism in burnout. A 2015 study that used the well-validated Trier social stress test found no differences in cortisol or ACTH responses between people with clinical burnout and healthy controls. The test successfully induced stress, but both groups responded similarly. Then came a revelation that helps make sense of these contradictory findings. In 2020, researchers examined cortisol patterns across different stages of burnout, from engagement to severe burnout. What they discovered was remarkable. Burnout appears to have distinct biological phases. People in early strain stages showed elevated cortisol awakening responses. Their bodies were working hard, stress systems fully activated. But people with severe burnout showed the opposite pattern: blunted, reduced cortisol responses. This research suggests that burnout doesn't just worsen gradually in a linear way. Instead, the body's stress response system appears to go through transformations. First, it amplifies, trying harder to meet demands. Then, if the stress continues without relief, it eventually dampens or fails, unable to sustain that heightened response indefinitely. Based on these findings, researchers have proposed that the contradictions in earlier research weren't errors. They were capturing different people at different stages of the same progressive condition. This theory remains an active area of research, but it offers a compelling framework for understanding the mixed findings that had puzzled scientists for years. What explains these inconsistent findings? Several factors likely contribute, and researchers have developed theories based on the patterns they've observed. First, burnout is heterogeneous. People may experience different patterns of symptoms, and the biological correlates might differ depending on severity, duration, or the specific dimensions of burnout that are most prominent. One study found evidence suggesting that cortisol patterns might differ based on burnout severity, with intermediate stages showing elevated cortisol and more severe burnout showing reduced cortisol, a finding that would later prove crucial to understanding the condition. Second, cortisol is influenced by many factors beyond burnout. Sleep quality, time of day, physical health conditions, medications, gender, age, and current stressors all affect cortisol levels. Disentangling the specific contribution of burnout from these confounding variables is methodologically challenging. Third, the relationship between psychological stress and biological stress responses is not one-to-one. How you perceive and appraise stressors, your coping strategies, your social support, all of these psychological factors influence whether and how stress translates into physiological activation. Two people facing similar work demands might show very different cortisol profiles depending on these mediating factors. Fourth, research suggests there may be important individual differences in biological vulnerability and response to chronic stress. Genetic variations in genes related to the HPA axis and stress response systems might make some people more susceptible to stress-related dysregulation. Early life experiences, particularly early adversity, can shape HPA axis functioning in lasting ways, creating what researchers call differential stress reactivity. The picture that emerges from research on HPA axis functioning in burnout is complex. There's no simple biomarker, no single blood test that can diagnose burnout. But there are suggestive patterns, some evidence of dysregulation, whether in the direction of hyperactivity in early stages or hypoactivity in later, more severe burnout. The flattening of normal diurnal rhythms, with abnormally high evening cortisol or abnormally low morning cortisol. Altered stress reactivity, with either exaggerated or blunted cortisol responses to acute stressors. This HPA axis dysregulation matters because cortisol affects so many other systems. Prolonged elevation of cortisol can have negative health consequences. Chronically high cortisol is associated with increased blood pressure, elevated blood sugar, weight gain particularly around the abdomen, reduced immune function, sleep disturbances, and impaired memory and cognitive function. Over time, these effects can contribute to increased risk for cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, infections, and other health problems. But the stress response system involves more than just the HPA axis. The SAM axis, involving the rapid release of catecholamines, is also implicated in burnout. Some research has found that people with burnout show elevated resting heart rate, suggesting sustained activation of the sympathetic nervous system. blood pressure patterns may also be affected. The autonomic nervous system, the part of your nervous system that regulates involuntary functions like heart rate, digestion, and respiration, has two branches: the sympathetic branch, which activates the fight-or-flight response, and the parasympathetic branch, which promotes rest, relaxation, and restoration. These two branches normally work in balance, with the sympathetic system activating in response to demands and the parasympathetic system helping you recover afterward. In chronic stress and burnout, this balance can be disrupted. Some research suggests that burnout is associated with reduced parasympathetic activity. Your body stays in a heightened state of activation, unable to fully relax and recover. This is sometimes measured through heart rate variability, the variation in time between heartbeats. Higher heart rate variability typically indicates better parasympathetic function and better stress resilience. Some studies have found reduced heart rate variability in people experiencing burnout, suggesting impaired parasympathetic activity and reduced ability to recover from stress. The immune system is also affected by chronic stress and burnout. Cortisol has immunosuppressive effects, reducing inflammation, but also making you more vulnerable to infections. Some research has found that people with burnout have altered cytokine profiles. Cytokines are signaling molecules involved in immune function and inflammation. Specifically, some studies have found elevated levels of anti-inflammatory cytokines like interleukin-10 in people with burnout, which might contribute to increased susceptibility to infections. Others have found evidence of low-grade inflammation with elevated pro-inflammatory markers. Again, the pattern is complex and not entirely consistent, but it suggests that immune function can be affected by burnout. The brain itself undergoes changes in response to chronic stress. Cortisol receptors are densely concentrated in several brain regions, particularly the hippocampus, which is crucial for memory formation and emotional regulation, and the prefrontal cortex, which governs executive functions like planning, decision-making, and impulse control. Prolonged exposure to high levels of cortisol can be toxic to neurons in these regions, leading to structural changes. Some brain imaging studies have found reduced gray matter volume in the prefrontal cortex and other brain regions in people experiencing chronic stress or burnout. These structural changes may help explain some of the cognitive symptoms of burnout: the difficulty concentrating, the memory problems, the reduced ability to plan and organize, the impaired decision-making. When the prefrontal cortex is compromised, these executive functions suffer. This can create a vicious cycle. The impaired cognitive function makes it harder to cope effectively with stress, which perpetuates and potentially worsens the burnout. Sleep is both affected by and affects the stress response. Cortisol influences sleep-wake cycles, and chronic elevation or dysregulation of cortisol can disrupt sleep. Many people with burnout experience insomnia or poor sleep quality. But lack of sleep also affects the HPA axis, potentially perpetuating the dysregulation. Sleep deprivation increases cortisol levels and can lead to sustained activation of stress response systems. This creates another vicious cycle. Stress disrupts sleep, which exacerbates stress, which further disrupts sleep. The dehydroepiandrosterone, or DHEA system, is also relevant to understanding the biological underpinnings of burnout. DHEA and its sulfated form, DHEAS, are androgenic hormones also produced by the adrenal cortex. They have neuroprotective, antioxidant, and anti-inflammatory properties, and may buffer against some of the negative effects of cortisol. Some research has examined the ratio of cortisol to DHEA as a potential marker of stress adaptation, with a higher ratio suggesting less buffering capacity. A few studies have found altered DHEA levels in people with burnout, though this area needs more research. It's important to emphasize that biological dysregulation in burnout is not inevitable, not irreversible, and not uniform across all individuals. Many people experience significant work stress and even meet criteria for burnout without showing pronounced biological changes. Others may have clear biological markers of stress dysregulation. The relationship between psychological experience and biological markers is probabilistic rather than deterministic. Moreover, these biological changes are not permanent damage. The brain retains neuroplasticity, the ability to form new neural connections and even to regenerate neurons in some regions throughout life. The HPA axis can re-regulate with changes in stress exposure and effective coping strategies. Sleep patterns can improve. Autonomic balance can be restored. Recovery is possible. Understanding the physiology of chronic stress and burnout serves several purposes. First, it validates the experience of burnout. This isn't just in your head in the sense of being imaginary or trivial. Your body is responding to real, sustained demands, and those responses have real consequences. Second, it helps explain why burnout feels the way it does, the deep physical exhaustion, the cognitive difficulties, the susceptibility to illness. Third, it points toward intervention targets. If we understand the biological processes involved, we can think about strategies to help regulate those processes through stress reduction, improved sleep, physical activity, relaxation techniques, and other approaches that support physiological resilience. The body under chronic stress is a body working hard to adapt to sustained demands, but that adaptation has costs. Understanding those costs and recognizing them as biological responses rather than personal failings is an important part of understanding burnout comprehensively. Your fatigue is not laziness. Your difficulty concentrating is not incompetence. Your irritability is not a character flaw. These are manifestations of biological systems responding to prolonged stress in ways that, while initially adaptive, can become dysregulated and burdensome when the stress persists without adequate recovery. 3 phases of exhaustion, the dimensions of burnout. Burnout isn't a singular experience. It's not just feeling tired or stressed. Christina Maslach's insight, which transformed burnout from a vague concept into something researchable and measurable, was recognizing that burnout has multiple interrelated dimensions. Understanding these 3 dimensions, emotional exhaustion, depersonalization or cynicism, and reduced personal accomplishment or efficacy, helps us see how burnout develops and manifests, and why it feels so all-encompassing when it strikes. Let's explore each dimension carefully, understanding what it looks like, how it feels, and how it contributes to the overall experience of burnout. Emotional exhaustion is often considered the core dimension of burnout, the most central and defining feature. It represents the depletion of emotional resources, the feeling of being emotionally overextended and drained by interactions and demands at work. Imagine your emotional reserves as a reservoir. Each demanding interaction, each stressful situation, each need to regulate your emotions or provide care to others draws from that reservoir. Normally, the reservoir refills during periods of rest, recovery, and positive experiences. But in emotional exhaustion, the demands consistently exceed the opportunities for replenishment. The reservoir runs lower and lower until it feels nearly empty. People experiencing emotional exhaustion describe feeling worn out, used up, at the end of their rope. There's a profound tiredness that isn't relieved by a good night's sleep or a weekend off. It's a fatigue that seeps into your bones, a sense of having nothing left to give. You might feel emotionally fragile, more easily moved to tears or anger than usual. Or conversely, you might feel emotionally numb, unable to access feelings that normally would arise. Emotional exhaustion affects how you experience your workday. Tasks that once felt manageable now feel overwhelming. Interactions with colleagues, clients, or customers that you might once have handled smoothly now feel draining. You might notice yourself dreading work, feeling your chest tighten or your stomach drop when you think about going in. The emotional labor of your job, maintaining a professional demeanor, managing your own emotions while attending to others, putting on a friendly face when you feel depleted, becomes increasingly difficult. This dimension has been found to correlate most strongly with traditional indicators of stress. Job demands, workload, time pressure, role conflict, and emotional demands from clients or customers all predict emotional exhaustion. In research using the job demands resources model, which we'll explore more later, job demands are primarily related to the emotional exhaustion component of burnout. But emotional exhaustion alone doesn't fully capture burnout. The second dimension provides a different window into the experience. Depersonalization, in Maslach's original formulation, referred specifically to the development of cold, cynical, and detached attitudes toward the people one is supposed to serve. This dimension emerged from Maslach's work with human service professionals, nurses, social workers, therapists, whose jobs centered on caring for others. Depersonalization represented a kind of defensive distancing, a psychological withdrawal from the people who were the recipients of one's care. When someone experiences depersonalization, they begin to treat people as objects rather than humans, to interact with them in impersonal, even callous ways. A nurse might refer to patients by their room number or diagnosis rather than their name. A teacher might stop seeing students as individuals and view them as burdens or annoyances. A therapist might feel contempt toward clients rather than empathy. This sounds harsh, and it is, but it's important to understand depersonalization not as cruelty, but as a coping mechanism, albeit a maladaptive one. When you're emotionally exhausted, continuing to engage emotionally with others' needs and struggles becomes overwhelming. Depersonalization is, in a sense, a way to protect yourself, to create emotional distance so that each interaction doesn't drain you further. It's a form of psychological self-preservation that unfortunately comes at significant cost. To the people you're serving, certainly, but also to you, because it violates your own values and your sense of who you are as a professional. As burnout research expanded beyond human services, this dimension was broadened and relabeled cynicism. Cynicism captures a similar idea of distancing and detachment, but applies it more broadly to work itself, not just to people. Someone experiencing high cynicism becomes detached from their work, indifferent to outcomes, skeptical about the value or meaning of what they're doing. Cynicism shows up as a loss of enthusiasm, a pervasive negativity, a sense that nothing really matters. You might hear it in sarcastic comments about work, in dismissive attitudes toward organizational initiatives, in the belief that effort is pointless because nothing will really change anyway. Where you once might have been engaged, committed, even passionate about your work, now there's a cold detachment, a going through the motions quality. This dimension, too, serves a psychological function. If you can convince yourself that the work doesn't matter, that it's not important or meaningful, then perhaps it hurts less when you can't do it well or when you don't care about it anymore. Cynicism is a way of protecting yourself from the disappointment and pain of caring deeply about something when you're too depleted to give it what it deserves. Research shows that cynicism tends to develop somewhat later in the burnout process, often as a consequence of prolonged emotional exhaustion. When you've been running on empty for too long, cynicism seeps in. It's also been linked to certain work conditions, particularly lack of job resources. When you don't have adequate support, autonomy, opportunities for growth, or fairness in your workplace, cynicism is more likely to develop. The third dimension captures another facet of the burnout experience: reduced personal accomplishment or reduced professional efficacy. This dimension reflects feelings of incompetence, lack of achievement, and declining productivity. It's the sense that you're not doing your job well, that you're failing to meet expectations, that your contributions don't matter or don't make a difference. Someone experiencing reduced efficacy might feel that their skills have diminished, that they used to be competent, but now they're not. Tasks that were once easy now seem difficult. Projects that you could once have managed smoothly now feel overwhelming. You might make more mistakes, miss deadlines, produce work that doesn't meet your own standards. There's a declining sense of accomplishment, a feeling that despite all your effort, nothing is really getting done. This dimension has an interesting relationship to the other two. In some models, reduced efficacy is seen as developing somewhat independently of emotional exhaustion and cynicism, more closely linked to lack of job resources like opportunities for professional development, social support, and autonomy. When you have resources that support your work, you're more likely to feel effective and accomplished. When those resources are lacking, efficacy suffers. But there are also ways that the dimensions interact and reinforce each other. When you're emotionally exhausted, it becomes harder to perform well, which can lead to reduced efficacy. When you're cynical and detached, you're less likely to put in the effort needed for high performance, again reducing efficacy. And conversely, when you feel ineffective and incompetent, it's emotionally draining, contributing to exhaustion, and it can foster cynicism as a defense against feelings of failure. These three dimensions together paint a picture of burnout that's more complete than any one dimension alone could capture. Emotional exhaustion speaks to the depleted feeling, the running on, empty. Cynicism captures the psychological distancing, the loss of meaning and engagement. Reduced efficacy reflects the impact on performance and sense of competence. Together they describe someone who is exhausted, detached, and feeling ineffective, a state that makes continuing to function in one's role increasingly difficult and distressing. But here's what makes burnout particularly insidious. These dimensions don't just coexist, they feed each other in destructive cycles. When you're emotionally exhausted, it becomes harder to perform well, which reduces your sense of efficacy. When you feel ineffective and incompetent, that failure is emotionally draining, deepening exhaustion. When exhaustion and inefficacy mount, cynicism creeps in as a psychological defense. If you convince yourself the work doesn't matter anyway, perhaps it hurts less that you can't do it well. And once cynicism takes hold, you're less likely to put in the effort needed for high performance, further undermining efficacy. Round and round it goes, each dimension worsening the others, spiraling deeper into burnout. This is why burnout can feel so totalizing, so inescapable. You're not just dealing with one problem, but with three interconnected problems that amplify each other. Breaking free requires interrupting these cycles, which is challenging when you're already depleted. Different people may experience these dimensions differently. Some research suggests that emotional exhaustion tends to emerge first and most prominently. Not everyone who is emotionally exhausted becomes cynical. Some maintain their dedication and commitment even while depleted, which may lead to a somewhat different trajectory. The pattern of symptoms can vary based on individual characteristics, specific job demands, and organizational context. There's also been debate about whether these three dimensions are necessary for a diagnosis or conceptualization of burnout, or whether burnout might be better understood as primarily exhaustion. Some researchers argue that exhaustion is the core, with cynicism and reduced efficacy being common but not definitional consequences. Others maintain that the three-dimensional model better captures the full syndrome. These debates continue in the literature. What's clear is that when all three dimensions are present in significant degree, the experience is profoundly debilitating. You're exhausted, detached from your work and perhaps from the people you serve, and feeling ineffective. This combination makes it very difficult to continue functioning in your role, let alone to thrive or find satisfaction in your work. Understanding these dimensions has practical implications. If someone is primarily experiencing emotional exhaustion but hasn't yet developed significant cynicism or reduced efficacy, intervention might focus on addressing the sources of emotional drain and building recovery opportunities. If cynicism is prominent, work might need to focus on reconnecting with meaning and values, addressing organizational issues that foster detachment. If reduced efficacy is the primary concern, interventions might emphasize skill development, reducing obstacles to performance, and building resources that support effectiveness. These dimensions also help explain why burnout feels different from ordinary stress or fatigue. It's not just that you're tired from working hard, it's that you're emotionally depleted, disconnected from what matters, and questioning your ability to function effectively. It affects your sense of identity, your relationships, your sense of meaning and purpose. It's a syndrome rather than just a symptom because it encompasses these multiple, interrelated dimensions of experience. When you understand burnout through these three dimensions, you can better recognize it in yourself or others, distinguish it from other problems, and think more precisely about what might help. Are you primarily dealing with exhaustion that needs rest and recovery? Are you grappling with cynicism that reflects deeper issues with your workplace or your connection to your work's meaning? Are you struggling with a sense of inefficacy that might benefit from skill building, additional support, or removal of obstacles to your effectiveness? Often, all three dimensions need attention, but understanding them separately helps clarify what's happening and what might help. The beauty and the burden of Maslach's three-dimensional conceptualization is that it gives us language and structure for understanding a complex, multifaceted experience. Burnout isn't simple, and these dimensions reflect that complexity. They show us how burnout affects different aspects of our work life and our inner experience, how it ripples through emotions, attitudes, and performance, creating a state that feels all-encompassing because, in a sense, it is the vulnerable self. Who is at risk for burnout? If burnout results from chronic workplace stress that hasn't been successfully managed, it seems reasonable to ask, who is most vulnerable? Are some people more susceptible to burnout than others? And if so, what makes them vulnerable? The answer, like much about burnout, is complex. Burnout is not simply a product of work conditions, nor is it simply a product of individual characteristics. It emerges from the interaction between the person and their work environment. Some work environments are so demanding, unsupportive, or toxic that they would burn out almost anyone. Some individuals might be more vulnerable due to personal characteristics, past experiences, or current life circumstances. Most often, burnout develops when multiple risk factors align: challenging work conditions, insufficient resources, and individual vulnerabilities, creating a perfect storm. Let's explore the individual factors first, understanding them not as fixed vulnerabilities or character flaws, but as variables that can influence susceptibility to burnout. Personality traits have been extensively studied in relation to burnout. Certain personality characteristics appear to increase vulnerability. Neuroticism, the tendency to experience negative emotions like anxiety, anger, and sadness more frequently and intensely, has been consistently associated with higher burnout risk, particularly with emotional exhaustion. People high in neuroticism may find work stressors more threatening or distressing, may ruminate more about negative experiences, and may have more difficulty regulating negative emotions, all of which can contribute to emotional depletion. Conversely, certain personality traits appear protective. Extroversion, which involves seeking social interaction and deriving energy from engagement with others, has been associated with lower burnout in many studies. Extroverts may find social interactions at work energizing rather than depleting, or they may be better at building social support networks that buffer against stress. Conscientiousness, the trait involving organization, diligence, and achievement orientation, reveals a fascinating paradox. On the surface, you'd expect highly conscientious people to be protected from burnout. They're organized, they manage their time well, they're good at meeting demands. And research does show that conscientiousness can be protective for these reasons. But here's the twist. Conscientiousness is a double-edged sword. When taken to an extreme, high conscientiousness can actually increase burnout risk. Why? Because extremely conscientious people may struggle to delegate, may feel personally responsible for everything, may work to the point of exhaustion trying to maintain their high standards, and may have difficulty saying no to additional responsibilities. The very trait that makes them excellent workers can become the mechanism of their undoing. This suggests that it's not just about having certain traits, it's about how those traits interact with work demands and whether they're balanced by other capacities like boundary setting. Perfectionism deserves special attention because it appears in multiple forms with different implications for burnout. Self-oriented perfectionism, setting extremely high standards for yourself and being harshly self-critical when you fail to meet them, is associated with increased burnout risk, especially with emotional exhaustion and reduced efficacy. The relentless self-criticism, the feeling that nothing is ever good enough, the inability to take satisfaction in your accomplishments, all of these deplete emotional resources and undermine sense of efficacy. Socially prescribed perfectionism, the belief that others have unrealistically high expectations of you and that your worth depends on meeting those expectations, is even more strongly associated with burnout. This form of perfectionism creates chronic stress because you believe you're constantly being evaluated and judged, and that failure to be perfect will result in rejection or loss of worth. In contrast, other-oriented perfectionism, having high standards for others, doesn't show the same strong relationship with burnout in most research, though it might create interpersonal difficulties that could contribute indirectly. The broader concept of workaholism is also relevant. Workaholism isn't simply working long hours or being highly committed to your work. It's characterized by a compulsive, uncontrollable need to work excessively, coupled with working so hard and long that it interferes with other important life domains and relationships. Workaholics may be driven by fear of failure, need for achievement, or internalized pressure to prove their worth. Research shows that workaholism is associated with increased burnout, particularly when the workaholic tendencies are combined with low work enjoyment or high work-life conflict. Self-efficacy, your belief in your own ability to effectively handle tasks and challenges, is another important individual factor. People with higher self-efficacy tend to appraise potentially stressful situations as more controllable and less threatening. They're more likely to use active coping strategies and to persist in the face of obstacles. Research has found that self-efficacy is protective against burnout, particularly against the reduced efficacy dimension. When you believe in your capabilities, you're less likely to feel overwhelmed by demands and more likely to feel a sense of accomplishment when you succeed. Optimism versus pessimism also plays a role. Optimists, people who generally expect good outcomes and see setbacks as temporary and specific, rather than permanent and pervasive, tend to be more resilient in the face of stress. They use more adaptive coping strategies and are less likely to develop burnout. Pessimists, conversely, may interpret work challenges more negatively and feel more hopeless about their ability to improve their situation, increasing vulnerability to burnout. Early life experiences shape vulnerability to burnout in important ways. Adverse childhood experiences, trauma, abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction during childhood can have lasting effects on stress reactivity and coping. People who experienced significant adversity early in life may have more reactive HPA axis functioning, making them more physiologically sensitive to stress. They may also have developed maladaptive coping patterns or may lack the sense of security and self-worth that helps buffer against work-related stress. Attachment style, which reflects patterns of relating to others that develop from early caregiver relationships, also influences burnout risk. Insecure attachment, whether anxious, avoidant, or disorganized, has been linked to higher burnout, possibly because insecurely attached individuals may have more difficulty accessing social support, may experience more interpersonal stress, or may have less resilience in the face of work challenges. Current life circumstances and stresses outside of work matter too. Someone going through a divorce, caring for a sick family member, dealing with financial stress, or experiencing other major life changes is more vulnerable to burnout, even if their work situation hasn't changed. The cumulative burden of multiple stressors depletes coping resources, leaving less capacity to manage work-related demands. Work-life balance is a crucial factor. When work demands bleed excessively into personal time, when there's insufficient time and energy for rest, relationships, and activities outside of work, burnout risk increases. This is sometimes conceptualized as work-home interference or work-family conflict. The inability to psychologically detach from work, to stop thinking about work problems when you're off the job, is particularly problematic. People who can't mentally separate from work continue experiencing work-related stress, even during non-work hours, leaving no time for true recovery. Age and career stage show interesting relationships with burnout. Some research suggests that younger workers and those early in their careers are at higher risk for burnout. This might be because they're still developing coping skills, may have less control over their work, might hold more idealistic expectations that are vulnerable to disillusionment, or face particular challenges in establishing themselves professionally. Other research finds that burnout can occur at any career stage and that the specific risk factors may shift across the career span. Gender differences in burnout have been studied extensively. Overall, men and women show similar rates of burnout, but there may be differences in which dimensions are most prominent or which factors predict burnout. Some research suggests women report higher emotional exhaustion on average, possibly reflecting gendered patterns in emotional labor expectations. Men may report higher depersonalization or cynicism. These patterns aren't absolute and don't apply to every individual, but they suggest that gender socialization and gendered experiences at work may shape how burnout manifests. Minority stress, the additional stress experienced by individuals from marginalized groups due to prejudice, discrimination, and the need to navigate environments that may not be welcoming or affirming, is an important risk factor for burnout. People who are racial or ethnic minorities, LGBTQ+, have disabilities, or belong to other marginalized groups may face additional stresses at work that contribute to burnout. They may need to engage in impression management, constantly monitoring their behavior to avoid confirming stereotypes. They may experience microaggressions, subtle slights or insults. They may lack representation in leadership or may feel isolated. All of this adds to the stress load, increasing burnout risk. It's crucial to emphasize that identifying individual risk factors is not about blaming individuals for burnout. The fact that certain personality traits or life circumstances increase vulnerability doesn't mean that burnout is the individual's fault. Work environments have the primary responsibility to create conditions that don't produce burnout. Understanding individual risk factors helps us recognize who might need additional support and helps individuals understand their own vulnerabilities so they can make informed decisions and seek appropriate resources. Moreover, many individual risk factors are not fixed or unchangeable. Coping skills can be learned and strengthened. Self-efficacy can be built through mastery experiences and supportive feedback. Perfectionistic tendencies can be recognized and worked with in therapy. Stress management and resilience can be developed. Understanding your vulnerabilities is the first step toward addressing them. There's also an important caveat about focusing too much on individual factors. Doing so can inadvertently shift attention away from organizational and systemic factors that are often more powerful determinants of burnout. If we frame burnout primarily as a problem of individual vulnerability or failure to cope, we risk placing the burden on workers to become more resilient rather than on employers to create healthier work environments. The reality is that individual resilience has limits. No amount of personal resilience will fully protect against genuinely toxic work conditions. No amount of self-care and coping skill can compensate for chronic understaffing, unrealistic expectations, or abusive management. So while understanding individual vulnerability is valuable, it must be balanced with attention to the work environment itself, which is where we'll turn next. Burnout is ultimately a problem that emerges at the interface between the person and their work context. Both matter, but in most cases, addressing organizational and environmental factors offers more leverage for preventing and reducing burnout than focusing solely on individual vulnerabilities and resilience. When workplaces make you sick, organizational contributors to burnout, while individual factors influence who becomes burned out, the research is clear. Burnout is fundamentally a problem of work environments. Certain organizational characteristics, work conditions, and management practices consistently predict burnout across different occupations, cultures, and populations. Understanding these organizational factors is crucial because it's where the most effective intervention often lies. One of the most influential frameworks for understanding how work environments contribute to burnout is the Job Demands Resources Model, or JDR model, developed by Arnold Bakker, Evangelia Demaruti, and colleagues in the early 2000s. This model proposes that working conditions can be classified into two broad categories: job demands and job resources, and these are differentially related to burnout. And its opposite, work engagement. Job demands are defined as the physical, psychological, social, or organizational aspects of the job that require sustained physical or mental effort and are therefore associated with certain physiological and psychological costs. Demands are not inherently bad, but they require effort to meet and can become depleting when they're excessive, sustained, or when adequate resources for meeting them are lacking. Key job demands that predict burnout include workload, time pressure, role ambiguity, role conflict, emotional demands, and stressful events or interactions. Let's explore each. Workload is perhaps the most straightforward demand. When there's simply too much work to do in the time available, when demands consistently exceed capacity, emotional exhaustion results. This isn't about occasionally having busy periods or short-term intense projects. It's about chronic overload, where the work is never fully caught up, where finishing one thing means 3 more have landed in your inbox, where you're perpetually behind. Quantitative overload, having too many tasks, is one form, but qualitative overload, tasks being too difficult or complex, also contributes. Both deplete resource and lead to exhaustion. Time pressure intensifies the stress of workload. When every task has a tight deadline, when there's no breathing room in the schedule, when you're constantly rushing, the cognitive and emotional strain increases. Time pressure also interferes with the quality of work you can produce, which can undermine sense of efficacy and create additional stress. Role ambiguity occurs when the expectations for your role aren't clear. You're uncertain about what your responsibilities are, what standards you're being evaluated against, or what your priorities should be. This creates ongoing stress because you can't be sure you're doing the right things or doing them well. It drains mental energy and undermines confidence. Role conflict happens when you face incompatible demands. Perhaps different supervisors have conflicting expectations. Maybe your role requires both providing compassionate care and enforcing rules, and you're not sure how to balance these. Or perhaps your personal values conflict with organizational requirements. Role conflict creates internal tension and makes it difficult to perform your role effectively, contributing to both emotional exhaustion and reduced efficacy. Emotional demands are particularly relevant for burnout. Jobs that require sustained emotional labor, displaying certain emotions regardless of what you actually feel, managing your own emotions while dealing with others' distress, providing emotional support, are depleting. Healthcare professionals, teachers, social workers, customer service representatives, and many others face significant emotional demands. Having to suppress irritation while being pleasant to a difficult customer, maintaining composure, while delivering bad news, staying calm in crisis situations, all of this requires effort and draws on emotional resources. Stressful events and interactions add acute bursts of stress. Conflict with colleagues or supervisors, dealing with aggressive or abusive clients or customers, witnessing suffering, facing complaints or threats. These events are emotionally and cognitively taxing. The JDR model proposes that job demands lead primarily to emotional exhaustion through a health impairment process. When demands are high and sustained, they create strain that depletes resources and leads to exhaustion. Research has strongly supported this pathway. But demands alone don't determine burnout. What matters is the balance between demands and resources. This brings us to job resources. Job resources are defined as the physical, psychological, social, or organizational aspects of the job that are functional in achieving work goals, reduce job demands and their associated costs, or stimulate personal growth, learning, and development. Resources are what help you meet demands, what make work possible and sustainable. Key job resources that protect against burnout include autonomy or control, social support from supervisors and colleagues, feedback on performance, opportunities for professional development and growth, fairness and justice in the workplace, job security, and rewards and recognition. Autonomy, having control over how you do your work, when you do it, and what tasks you prioritize, is one of the most important resources. When you have autonomy, you can manage your work in ways that suit your strengths and preferences. You can take breaks when needed, tackle tasks in the order that makes sense, and have some influence over your workload. Lack of autonomy, conversely, is strongly associated with burnout. When you're micromanaged, when every decision must be approved, when you have no flexibility, it's depleting and undermining to your sense of efficacy. Social support from both supervisors and co-workers is protective against burnout. Support can be emotional, having people who listen, care, and provide encouragement. It can be instrumental, colleagues helping with tasks when you're overwhelmed. It can be informational, getting advice or guidance when you're uncertain. People with strong supportive relationships at work are less likely to burn out, even when facing high demands. Conversely, poor relationships, conflict with supervisors or co-workers, lack of teamwork, and social isolation at work increase burnout risk. Feedback helps you know how you're doing and provides opportunities for learning and improvement. When feedback is regular, specific, and constructive, it supports efficacy and prevents the uncertainty and self-doubt that can develop without clear information about your performance. Lack of feedback leaves you guessing and can contribute to feelings of ineffectiveness. Opportunities for professional development and growth are important for sustained engagement and satisfaction. When you can learn new skills, take on new challenges, and see a path forward in your career, work feels meaningful and rewarding. When you feel stuck, with no opportunities for advancement or development, cynicism can develop. Fairness and justice in the workplace matter deeply. This includes procedural justice, fair processes for making decisions, and distributive justice, fair distribution of rewards and resources. When you perceive that you're treated fairly, that decisions are made transparently with input from those affected, that rewards are distributed equitably, you're more likely to feel valued and respected. Conversely, when you perceive injustice, favoritism, arbitrary decisions, inequitable treatment, it breeds resentment, cynicism, and exhaustion. Job security provides a foundation for well-being. When you're worried about losing your job, when layoffs loom or contracts are constantly uncertain, it's a chronic stressor that depletes resources. Conversely, reasonable job security allows you to invest in your work without constant fear. Rewards and recognition validate your efforts and accomplishments. This includes financial compensation that's adequate and fair, but also non-monetary recognition, appreciation, acknowledgement, celebration of achievements. When hard work goes unrecognized, when contributions are taken for granted, it undermines motivation and satisfaction. The JDR model proposes that job resources have a motivational function, leading to work engagement, a positive state characterized by vigor, dedication, and absorption in one's work. Resources also have a buffering function, mitigating the impact of demands on strain. When you have high demands but also adequate resources, burnout is less likely. The most problematic situations are high demands combined with low resources. This is related to Robert Karasek's earlier demand control model, which proposed that job strain results from the combination of high demands and low control. The JDR model expands this by considering a broader range of demands and resources beyond just workload and control. But the core insight is similar. It's not just the level of demands, but the resources available for meeting them that determines whether burnout develops. Research testing the JDR model has found strong support across numerous occupational groups and countries. Job demands like workload, emotional demands, and role conflict consistently predict emotional exhaustion. Lack of job resources, particularly autonomy, social support, and feedback, consistently predicts cynicism and reduced efficacy. And importantly, resources do buffer the effects of demands. When resources are high, the relationship between demands and burnout is weaker. Beyond the JDR model, other organizational factors contribute to burnout. Let's explore a few particularly important ones. Organizational culture and climate matter. Toxic cultures, those characterized by distrust, blame, political infighting, lack of transparency, or tolerance of disrespect and harassment, are breeding grounds for burnout. Conversely, cultures that emphasize psychological safety, where people feel they can speak up without fear of punishment or ridicule, where mistakes are treated as learning opportunities rather than failures, where respect and collaboration are valued, these cultures protect against burnout. Leadership and management style significantly impact burnout. Abusive or toxic leadership, supervisors who are hostile, belittling, or unfair, directly contribute to burnout. But even without overt abuse, poor management practices increase burnout risk. Micromanagement, lack of communication, failure to provide clear expectations or support, inconsistent decision-making, not recognizing or valuing employees' contributions, all of these undermine well-being. Conversely, supportive, transformational leadership that inspires, provides vision, supports employee development, and treats people with respect is protective. Leaders who model healthy work practices, who prioritize well-being, who buffer their teams from unreasonable demands, and who advocate for necessary resources help prevent burnout in their teams. Organizational change and instability can contribute to burnout in ways that might surprise you. We typically think of change as either good or bad. Restructuring is bad, but innovation is good. Digital transformation is exciting. New leadership brings fresh perspectives. But research suggests something more nuanced. Even positive changes create stress if they're constant or poorly managed. Here's why. Change, regardless of whether it's framed as positive, requires adaptation. Every new system you must learn, every restructured team you must navigate, every policy shift you must accommodate. These draw on cognitive and emotional resources. When changes are constant, you're perpetually adapting, never quite settling into routines that could become efficient and less effortful. Frequent changes in policies or procedures, mergers or acquisitions, leadership turnover, all of these create uncertainty, require adaptation, and can disrupt established relationships and routines. This helps explain a puzzling phenomenon: why organizations undergoing exciting growth or innovation initiatives sometimes see rising burnout rates. The growth isn't bad, but if it means constant change without stability, constant new demands without time to consolidate, the result can be exhaustion, regardless of how positive the direction seems. Some change is inevitable and even positive, but excessive or poorly managed change is stressful and depleting, even when the changes themselves are meant to improve things. Work-home interference, mentioned earlier as an individual factor, is substantially shaped by organizational policies and practices. Organizations that expect, or implicitly, require extensive overtime, that contact employees outside work hours, that don't respect boundaries between work and personal life, or that make it difficult to use vacation time, create conditions for burnout. Conversely, organizations that offer flexibility, respect time off, and support work-life integration help employees sustain their work over the long term. Specific occupational groups face particular organizational risk factors. Healthcare workers, who have been studied extensively in relation to burnout, face not only heavy workloads and emotional demands, but also factors like moral distress, situations where they know what the right action is, but are prevented by institutional constraints from taking it. They may face inadequate staffing, making it impossible to provide the quality of care they aspire to. They deal with bureaucratic requirements that take time away from patient care. These specific stressors contribute to the notably high rates of burnout in healthcare professions. Teachers face similar challenges: large class sizes, lack of autonomy due to standardized curricula and testing requirements, insufficient resources, administrative burdens, and increasingly, violence or threats from students. The mismatch between the idealistic vision of teaching, inspiring young minds, making a difference, and the reality of constraints and challenges contributes to disillusionment and burnout in teaching professions. Understanding organizational contributors to burnout is crucial because it shows that burnout is not primarily a problem of individual weakness or poor coping. It's a problem of work environments that create unsustainable conditions. When organizations systematically overload employees, fail to provide necessary resources, treat people unfairly, or create toxic cultures, burnout is the predictable result. This has important implications. While individuals can work on coping skills and resilience, truly addressing burnout requires organizational change. Employers bear responsibility for creating work environments that don't burn people out. This means managing workloads realistically, providing adequate resources and support, treating employees fairly, fostering positive workplace cultures, and addressing the structural and systemic factors that create excessive demands or insufficient resources. There's growing recognition in research and practice that organization-directed interventions, changes to work conditions, job design, staffing levels, policies, and management practices are more effective and longer-lasting in reducing burnout than individual-directed interventions alone. Personal resilience matters, but it cannot compensate for organizational failures. The most effective approach combines organizational improvements with individual support, addressing burnout at multiple levels simultaneously. From engagement to exhaustion, the progression of burnout. Burnout doesn't typically strike suddenly like a bolt from the blue. It develops gradually, progressing through stages or phases that, if understood, offer opportunities for recognition and intervention before reaching severe burnout. Various models have been proposed to describe this progression. While the specifics differ, most share the recognition that burnout is a process that unfolds over time, with identifiable warning signs along the way. One influential perspective comes from research examining the trajectory from work engagement, a positive state of vigor, dedication, and absorption in one's work, to burnout. Engagement and burnout are not simply opposite ends of a single continuum. They're related but distinct, and understanding the transition between them helps illuminate how burnout develops. People typically begin their careers or new positions in a state that could be called enthusiasm or engagement. They're energized about the work, feel connected to its meaning and purpose, are absorbed in tasks, and experience a sense of accomplishment. This is the honeymoon phase, where challenges feel manageable and even exciting, where the focus is on possibilities rather than limitations. But sustained high demands without adequate recovery or the gradual erosion of resources begins to shift this state. The first changes are often subtle. You might notice feeling more tired at the end of the workday. Tasks that were energizing start to feel effortful. The enthusiasm, while still present, has to be summoned rather than arising naturally. You're still engaged, still committed, but there's a growing sense of strain. Some researchers have identified an intermediate stage called strain or ineffective engagement. You're still trying hard, still committed to the work, but you're starting to feel the costs. Your energy is depleting faster than it's replenishing. You might start having trouble sleeping or notice increasing irritability. Physical symptoms like headaches or digestive issues might appear. You're pushing through, but it's requiring more effort to maintain performance. Now here's where the biology we discussed earlier becomes visible in lived experience. Remember the cortisol research that showed elevated awakening responses in some burnout cases? Research on cortisol patterns across the burnout progression found that people in this strained stage showed elevated cortisol awakening responses compared to engaged workers. Their stress response systems were activating more strongly, trying to mobilize resources to meet demands. This elevated cortisol reflects the body working overtime to adapt to sustained stress. You can feel this, the racing heart in the morning, the tension that won't fully release, the sense of being always on. If the demands continue without relief, or if resources continue to be inadequate or to erode further, the progression continues. Cynicism begins to creep in. You start to question whether the work matters, whether the effort is worth it. The meaning you once found in your work becomes obscured. You might start feeling detached, going through the motions rather than being fully present. This stage has been labeled cynicism or overextension. You're still functioning, but the psychological connection to your work is fraying. In this stage, the cortisol awakening response remains elevated, or may even be more elevated. The body is still trying to respond to demands, but the psychological experience has shifted from strain to distancing and detachment. Finally, if burnout progresses further, you reach full burnout, high emotional exhaustion, high cynicism, low efficacy. You're depleted, detached, and feeling ineffective. And here's the remarkable finding. In this stage, some research has found that the cortisol awakening response is actually reduced or blunted compared to earlier stages. It's as if the stress response system, after prolonged activation, has become exhausted or dysregulated. The body can no longer mount the same stress response it did in earlier stages. This biological pattern mirrors the psychological experience. At first, you fight harder. Then you distance yourself to cope. Finally, you can't fight anymore. Not because you've chosen to give up, but because your capacity to respond has been depleted at a fundamental physiological level. This progression isn't inevitable or linear for everyone. Some people might experience sudden burnout after a particularly intense period or a specific stressful event. Others might plateau at subclinical levels of burnout symptoms without progressing to severe burnout. Some might cycle between engagement and strain depending on current demands and resources. Individual differences in vulnerability, coping, and support influence the trajectory. But understanding this general progression is valuable for several reasons. First, it helps recognize that burnout has warning signs. If you catch yourself in the strain phase, feeling more exhausted than usual, having trouble sleeping, needing more effort to maintain enthusiasm, these are signals that intervention is needed. Making changes at this stage, seeking support, addressing workload, taking time off, engaging in recovery activities, can prevent progression to more severe burnout. The prevalence of burnout-related symptoms has been documented across numerous studies, though exact rates vary based on how burnout is defined and measured. A 2022 survey by Visier found that 89% of US employees reported experiencing burnout within the past year, with 27% reporting experiencing it all the time. Other research has found rates ranging from approximately 50 to 76% depending on the population and methodology. Among healthcare workers, particularly during and after the COVID-19 pandemic, rates have been even higher, with some studies finding 70% or more reporting significant burnout symptoms. A 2024 systematic review of public health workers found pooled burnout prevalence of 39% globally. These variations in reported rates largely reflect differences in measurement tools, severity thresholds, and the populations studied. What's consistent across studies is that burnout is extremely common and represents a significant public health concern affecting millions of workers worldwide. Second, it highlights the role of both chronic strain and insufficient recovery. Burnout develops when demands persistently exceed resource and when there aren't adequate opportunities for recovery. This suggests that both reducing demands and enhancing resources and recovery are important for prevention. Third, it shows that the transition from engagement to burnout isn't just about increasing exhaustion. The psychological dimensions shift too, from connection to detachment, from efficacy to ineffectiveness, from enthusiasm to cynicism. Interventions need to address these psychological dimensions, not just the physical exhaustion. Different burnout models emphasize different aspects of the progression. Herbert Freudenberger, in his early writings, described a multi-stage model that began with compulsion to prove oneself, working harder to demonstrate competence or worth. then progressed through neglect of personal needs, displacement of conflict, blaming others or circumstances rather than recognizing internal distress, revision of values, what once mattered becomes unimportant, denial of emerging problems, withdrawal from social relationships, observable behavioral changes, depersonalization, feeling disconnected from oneself, inner emptiness, depression, and finally, complete burnout collapse characterized by total mental and physical exhaustion. This model emphasizes the psychological defenses and adaptations that occur along the way. As burnout develops, people employ various strategies to cope, working harder, denying that anything is wrong, withdrawing from others, becoming cynical. These strategies provide temporary relief, but ultimately contribute to worsening burnout. Another perspective views burnout progression through the lens of self-regulatory failure. Initially, when facing demands, people respond by increasing effort. They work harder, longer hours, take on more tasks. This can be effective in the short term. Deadlines are met, problems are solved. But this strategy isn't sustainable. The increased effort depletes resources. If recovery opportunities are insufficient, resources don't replenish adequately. As depletion increases, people begin to cut corners, reduce effort, or disengage as a way to conserve remaining resources. This might look like cynicism, or reduced productivity, or withdrawal. These behaviors, while protective in one sense, preventing complete collapse, have negative consequences for performance and well-being, creating a vicious cycle. Reduced effort leads to poorer outcomes, which may lead to criticism or increased pressure, which demands more effort, which depletes resources further. This self-undermining cycle is difficult to break without intervention. The burned-out person is too depleted to respond effectively to increasing demands. But the demands keep coming, maintaining or worsening the burnout. Recovery requires breaking this cycle. Sometimes this happens through external intervention, a change in work circumstances, a supportive conversation with a manager, a restructuring that reduces demands. Sometimes it requires the individual to make difficult choices, setting boundaries, refusing additional responsibilities, taking extended leave, or even changing jobs. Often, both external changes and active self-protective measures are needed. It's worth noting that recovery from burnout, like burnout development itself, typically occurs gradually rather than suddenly. You don't go from severe burnout to full health overnight. There may be phases of recovery, first stopping the worsening, stabilization, then beginning to replenish resources and reduce symptoms, recovery, and finally, returning to sustainable functioning, restored. Some people may not fully return to their previous level of functioning, but find a new equilibrium that, while different, is workable and sustainable. The time frame for burnout development and recovery varies considerably. Some people develop burnout relatively quickly, within months of entering a particularly demanding role or experiencing a significant increase in demands. Others might experience gradually accumulating strain over years before reaching clinical burnout. Similarly, recovery might occur within weeks or months for some people, particularly if the contributing factors are addressed promptly and comprehensively. For others, especially those with severe burnout, or when work conditions don't change, recovery can take much longer, sometimes a year or more. Understanding burnout as a progression rather than a single state also helps make sense of the varied prevalence rates in research. Studies asking whether someone has burnout get different answers depending on how burnout is defined and at what point in the progression someone might be classified as burned out. Some studies use fairly lenient criteria, capturing people in early stages of strain, yielding high prevalence estimates. Others use stricter criteria requiring high scores on all three burnout dimensions, yielding lower but perhaps more clinically meaningful estimates. What's clear across most research is that burnout-related symptoms are extremely common. Recent studies suggest that roughly half of workers globally experience at least some symptoms of burnout. Rates are particularly high in certain occupations, healthcare, teaching, social services, and have been elevated by recent global events, including the COVID-19 pandemic, which dramatically increased demands and stress for many workers while reducing resources and support. The progression of burnout reminds us that small changes accumulate, that warning signs matter, and that early intervention is valuable. It also shows that burnout, while serious, is not an irreversible condition. With appropriate changes, whether in work conditions, personal boundaries, coping strategies, or support, recovery is possible. When the body breaks down, the consequences of burnout. Burnout doesn't stay neatly contained within the psychological realm or limited to subjective feelings of exhaustion and cynicism. It has real, measurable consequences for physical health, mental health, social relationships, and professional functioning. Understanding these consequences underscores the seriousness of burnout and the importance of prevention and intervention. Let's begin with physical health. Burnout has been linked to a range of adverse health outcomes. Some of these connections are well established, others are emerging areas of research. Cardiovascular health is one area of particular concern. Several longitudinal studies have found that burnout, especially emotional exhaustion, predicts increased risk for cardiovascular disease and cardiac events. One study found that people with burnout had significantly elevated risk of hospitalization for cardiovascular events like heart attack or angina, even after controlling for other risk factors. Here's what makes this especially sobering. The risk increase was comparable to that seen with traditional cardiovascular risk factors like smoking or high cholesterol. In other words, chronic work stress and burnout might be as dangerous to your heart as physically harmful habits we typically focus on. The mechanisms likely involve both the chronic physiological stress associated with burnout, sustained elevation of blood pressure and heart rate, elevated levels of stress hormones, and behavioral pathways, as burned-out individuals may engage in less healthy behaviors. Metabolic health can also suffer. Burnout has been associated with increased risk for type 2 diabetes. Again, this likely reflects both physiological stress responses that affect glucose metabolism and insulin sensitivity, and behavioral factors like poor diet, reduced physical activity, and weight gain that may accompany burnout. Sleep disturbances are extremely common in burnout. Many people with burnout report difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, or experiencing restorative sleep. This creates another vicious cycle, as poor sleep exacerbates exhaustion, impairs cognitive function, worsens mood, and makes it harder to cope with stress effectively. The sleep difficulties may reflect both the physiological arousal associated with stress and the cognitive processes of rumination and worry that make it hard to mentally shut down at night. Musculoskeletal pain is also commonly reported by people experiencing burnout. This includes headaches, back pain, neck and shoulder pain, and general muscular tension. The mechanisms likely include sustained muscle tension from stress, postural effects from prolonged sitting or tense working conditions, and possibly altered pain perception in the context of chronic stress and depleted coping resources. Immune function can be compromised in burnout. While the research is mixed, some studies have found that people with burnout show altered immune markers, including reduced resistance to infections. Burned-out individuals may experience more frequent colds, flu, and other infections. This may reflect the immunosuppressive effects of chronic stress and elevated cortisol, as well as behavioral factors like inadequate sleep and nutrition. More concerningly, burnout has been prospectively linked to increased all-cause mortality in some studies. Even after controlling for other health risk factors, people with high burnout had elevated mortality risk. This underscores that burnout is not merely uncomfortable or unpleasant, it can have serious long-term health consequences. Moving to mental health, the relationship between burnout and depression is complex and has been the subject of much research and debate. Burnout and depression share some features: fatigue, loss of interest, reduced efficacy or self-worth, negative thinking, leading some to question whether they're truly distinct conditions. However, most research supports viewing them as related but different. Burnout is context-specific to work, while depression is more pervasive across life domains. Burnout features exhaustion and cynicism prominently, while depression features anhedonia, inability to experience pleasure, and profound sadness more centrally. That said, burnout and depression frequently co-occur. Longitudinal studies suggest that burnout can be a risk factor for later depression. Someone experiencing severe burnout who doesn't recover may develop clinical depression. The exact percentage varies across studies, but somewhere between 25 to 50% of people with burnout also meet criteria for depression. Anxiety disorders are also elevated among people with burnout. The chronic stress and hyperarousal associated with burnout can manifest as generalized anxiety, panic attacks, or social anxiety. The physiological activation, the constant worry about work and performance, the anticipatory dread about going to work, all of these reflect anxiety that often accompanies burnout. Substance use and abuse are potential consequences of burnout. Some people cope with the stress and negative emotions of burnout by using alcohol, drugs, or other substances. What might begin as occasional use to relax or escape can escalate into problematic use or dependence, adding another layer of difficulty to an already challenging situation. Suicidal ideation is a serious concern. While not all people with burnout experience suicidal thoughts, some research has found elevated rates of suicidal ideation among burned-out individuals, particularly when burnout co-occurs with depression or when other risk factors like hopelessness, social isolation, or lack of support are present. This is a critical reminder that burnout, while not classified as a mental disorder, can be associated with severe psychological distress that requires attention and intervention. Social relationships suffer under burnout. The cynicism and emotional detachment that characterize burnout don't automatically turn off when you leave work. They can spill over into personal relationships, making you more irritable, less engaged, more withdrawn from friends and family. The exhaustion makes it hard to find energy for social activities or to be fully present when you do participate. Over time, relationships can become strained or erode. Family relationships in particular can be affected. Work-family conflict, the interference of work demands with family life, is both a predictor and a consequence of burnout. Burned-out individuals may have less patience, energy, or emotional availability for their partners or children. They may bring work stress home, affecting the emotional climate of the household. Partners of burned-out individuals report effects on their own well-being. Marital satisfaction tends to be lower when one or both partners are experiencing burnout. The combination of irritability, withdrawal, reduced communication, and general stress creates tension in relationships. This is particularly concerning because supportive relationships are protective against burnout, so the erosion of these relationships removes an important buffer. Parenting can be affected by burnout. Burned-out parents may be less emotionally available, less patient, more reactive. They may have difficulty maintaining consistent routines or engaging in quality activities with children. While most parents continue to care for their children's basic needs, the quality of the parent-child relationship and the parent's sense of competence and satisfaction in their parenting role can suffer. Professional consequences of burnout are significant. Job performance typically declines. People with burnout report reduced productivity, more errors, lower quality work. This isn't due to lack of caring or effort. It reflects the cognitive and emotional impairments associated with exhaustion and the reduced engagement associated with cynicism. In professions involving interaction with clients, patients, or students, the depersonalization component of burnout can lead to poorer quality of service. Healthcare providers with burnout may be less empathetic, less thorough in their assessments, more prone to medical errors. Teachers with burnout may be less effective educators, less patient with students, less creative in their teaching. Customer service representatives with burnout may provide worse service, be less helpful, or even be rude. The personal consequences for the individual's career can be severe. People with burnout often have reduced career satisfaction and increased turnover intentions. Many burned out workers end up leaving their jobs or even their professions entirely. This represents a significant loss, both for the individual, who may have invested years in training and developing expertise, and for the organization and field, which lose experienced professionals. Burnout-related turnover has been studied extensively in healthcare, where it's recognized as contributing to nursing shortages and physician shortages. The cost of recruiting and training replacement workers is substantial, and the loss of experienced staff affects organizational functioning and capacity. Absenteeism, missing work due to illness or other reasons, is elevated among people with burnout. Burned-out workers take more sick days, partly due to the physical health consequences mentioned earlier, and partly perhaps as a way to temporarily escape overwhelming work demands. Some countries that recognize burnout as a legitimate medical condition see substantial numbers of workers on extended sick leave due to burnout. Presenteeism, being physically present at work but functioning at reduced capacity, is also common in burnout. The burned-out worker shows up but isn't fully productive or engaged. They go through the motions but don't contribute at their potential level. Presenteeism can actually be more costly to organizations than absenteeism because it's harder to recognize and address. And the reduced productivity affects not just the individual but potentially their team and projects. The economic costs of burnout are staggering. In the United States alone, workplace stress, of which burnout is a significant component, is estimated to cost more than $500 billion annually, with 550 million workdays lost each year due to stress on the job. Research examining workplace stress's impact on mortality and health costs found that it led to nearly 120,000 deaths and nearly $190 billion in healthcare spending annually in the US. Globally, the World Health Organization estimates that depression and anxiety, which frequently co-occur with burnout, result in approximately $1 trillion in lost productivity each year. While not all of this can be attributed solely to burnout, the overlap is substantial. To put this in perspective, burnout costs the global economy more each year than many countries' entire GDP. It's not just an individual problem or even just an organizational concern. It's a major public health and economic issue affecting societies worldwide. Beyond measurable costs, there are existential and spiritual consequences of burnout that are harder to quantify but deeply important. Burnout often involves a crisis of meaning. Work that once felt purposeful and valuable comes to feel meaningless or futile. This can trigger broader questions about identity, purpose, and direction in life. For many people, work is central to their sense of self. When work becomes a source of suffering rather than satisfaction, It can precipitate identity, crises, and profound questioning of life choices. The loss of competence and efficacy associated with burnout can be deeply troubling. People often take pride in being good at their jobs, in contributing meaningfully. When burnout undermines this sense of competence, when you feel like you're failing at something you once did well, it can shake your self-confidence and self-esteem in ways that extend beyond the work context. But here's a question worth holding. What if these consequences, painful as they are, aren't just damage? What if the exhaustion that forces you to stop, the cynicism that distances you from unsustainable emotional labor, the reduced performance that makes continuing impossible? What if these aren't just symptoms of a disorder, but your system's way of forcing change when change won't happen voluntarily? We'll return to this question later, but consider it as we continue. These various consequences of burnout highlight several important points. First, burnout is not merely subjective distress or a transient difficulty. It has real, serious consequences for health, well-being, relationships, and functioning. Second, the consequences extend beyond the individual, affecting families, organizations, and society. Third, the consequences can create self-perpetuating cycles. Health problems worsen burnout, relationship problems remove sources of support, declining performance creates additional stress, making recovery more difficult. Understanding the consequences of burnout underscores the importance of taking burnout seriously, both at an individual level, seeking help and making changes when you recognize burnout in yourself, and at an organizational and societal level, recognizing burnout as a public health concern that deserves attention, resources, and intervention. Recognizing the signs. Assessment and diagnosis of burnout. Recognizing burnout, whether in yourself or others, is an essential step toward addressing it. But this recognition isn't always straightforward. Burnout can be subtle in its early stages, can be confused with other conditions, and can be denied or minimized even when symptoms are significant. Let's explore how burnout is recognized and assessed, starting with self-recognition. For many people, the first awareness of burnout comes from noticing persistent changes in how they feel and function. You might recognize that you're consistently exhausted in ways that rest doesn't relieve. You notice dreading work, feeling cynical or detached in ways that don't feel like your authentic self. You realize that work that once felt manageable now feels overwhelming, that you're making more mistakes, that you're not performing at your usual level. Physical symptoms can also serve as warning signs. Persistent headaches, frequent illnesses, insomnia, or changes in appetite might prompt reflection on whether work stress has become excessive. Emotional signs like increased irritability, more frequent, crying, feeling emotionally numb, or experiencing anxiety about work are important indicators. Behavioral changes can be observable to yourself or others. Working longer hours to keep up, but feeling less productive, withdrawing from colleagues, avoiding work-related social activities, increased use of alcohol or other substances to cope, or conflicts with co-workers or family members might all reflect developing or existing burnout. Various self-assessment tools are available that can help formalize this self-recognition. The most widely known is the Maslach Burnout Inventory itself, though this is a proprietary tool typically administered in research or clinical settings rather than being freely available for self-assessment online. However, many organizations and websites offer burnout self-assessment questionnaires based on similar dimensions, asking about exhaustion, cynicism, and efficacy, that can provide a structured way to evaluate your experience. These self-assessments typically ask you to rate how frequently you experience various feelings or thoughts related to work. For example, how often do you feel emotionally drained from your work? Or how often do you feel burned out from your work? Or how often do you doubt the significance of your work? Responses are usually on frequency scales like never, rarely, sometimes, often, or always, or numeric scales. Different versions of the MBI exist for different occupational groups. The original MBI Human Services Survey was designed for those working in human services professions. The MBI Educators Survey is tailored for teachers and educational staff. The MBI General Survey is designed for workers in all occupations. Other burnout measures like the Oldenburg Burnout Inventory or the Copenhagen Burnout Inventory approach assessment somewhat differently but measure similar constructs. It's important to understand what these assessments do and don't tell you. They can indicate whether your level of burnout symptoms is elevated compared to norms or cutoff points. They can help you recognize patterns in your experience. Perhaps you score very high on exhaustion, but lower on cynicism, for example. But they don't provide a diagnosis in the medical sense, because, as we've discussed, burnout isn't classified as a clinical diagnosis in most contexts. That said, in some countries, healthcare providers can and do provide clinical evaluations that identify burnout as a condition requiring treatment or sick leave. In these settings, the assessment might involve not just questionnaires, but also clinical interviews exploring symptoms, functional impairment, work conditions, and ruling out or identifying comorbid conditions. This brings us to an important aspect of assessment: differential diagnosis. Burnout shares features with several other conditions, and it's important to distinguish burnout from depression, anxiety disorders, chronic fatigue syndrome, and other conditions that might present similarly but require different approaches to treatment. Burnout and depression are the most frequently confused. Both involve fatigue, loss of interest, feelings of ineffectiveness, sleep disturbances, and irritability. So how do clinicians distinguish them? First, burnout is context-specific to work, while depression is pervasive across life domains. Someone with burnout typically feels better when they're away from work, on vacation, during weekends. The symptoms are most prominent in relation to work or when thinking about work. Someone with depression experiences symptoms consistently across contexts. They feel depressed at work, at home, during leisure activities. That said, severe burnout can become more pervasive, making this distinction less clear-cut. Second, burnout features exhaustion and cynicism prominently, while depression features sad mood, anhedonia, loss of pleasure, and feelings of worthlessness or guilt more centrally. Someone with burnout might still experience pleasure in non-work activities, while someone with depression typically has difficulty experiencing pleasure in any activities. Third, some symptoms are more specific to depression than burnout, including suicidal thoughts, feelings of guilt or worthlessness unrelated to work performance, and psychomotor changes, moving and thinking noticeably slower, or conversely, agitation. If these are present, depression should be considered even if burnout is also present. Fourth, burnout is generally thought to be reactive, arising in response to chronic work stress, while depression can be endogenous, arising without clear environmental triggers, or reactive to various life stresses beyond just work. In practice, burnout and depression often co-occur, and this comorbidity complicates assessment. Some people have burnout that has progressed to depression. Some have both burnout from work stress and depression from other life stressors or from biological vulnerability. Careful assessment is needed to understand what's present and how best to address it. Burnout also shares features with anxiety disorders, particularly generalized anxiety disorder. The worry, the physical tension, The sleep disturbances, the sense of dread, these can occur in both conditions. Again, the work-specific nature of burnout and the focus of worry on work-related concerns can help distinguish burnout-related anxiety from more pervasive anxiety disorders. But comorbidity is common here too. Chronic fatigue syndrome presents a different challenge in differential diagnosis. Chronic fatigue syndrome involves profound, persistent fatigue that isn't relieved by rest, along with other symptoms like cognitive difficulties, sleep problems, and physical symptoms. The fatigue in burnout is similar, but burnout has the added dimensions of cynicism and reduced efficacy specifically related to work, whereas chronic fatigue syndrome doesn't have this work-specific focus and typically arises in a different way. When assessing burnout, it's also important to evaluate functional impairment. How much is the burnout affecting your ability to do your job, maintain relationships, take care of yourself, engage in activities you value? This functional assessment helps determine the severity of burnout and the level of intervention needed. Organizational level assessment of burnout is also relevant. Organizations might conduct surveys of their workforce to assess levels of burnout as part of efforts to understand employee well-being and identify areas needing intervention. These assessments can reveal that certain departments, roles, or groups are experiencing particularly high levels of burnout, pointing toward the need for targeted changes. Some research has explored potential biological markers or tests for burnout, cortisol levels, heart rate variability, inflammatory markers. But as we discussed earlier, the findings aren't consistent enough to support diagnostic use of these measures. There's no blood test or brain scan that can definitively diagnose burnout. The assessment remains primarily based on self-reported experience, observable behavior, and functional impairment, evaluated within the context of work stress and resources. For individuals, recognizing burnout often involves reaching a point where the symptoms become undeniable, where the strategies you've been using to cope stop working, where something prompts you to acknowledge that what you're experiencing isn't just normal work stress, but something more significant. This recognition might come from a health crisis, a breakdown in a relationship, feedback from concerned others, or a moment of honest self-reflection. Sometimes recognition comes through education about burnout, reading about it, hearing others describe their experiences using an assessment tool, and suddenly seeing your own experience reflected in the descriptions. There can be relief in this recognition, in having language for what you're experiencing, in understanding that you're not alone or weak, but rather experiencing a legitimate condition that others face too. But recognition can also bring resistance. Acknowledging burnout might feel like admitting defeat or failure. In work cultures that value toughness and productivity above well-being, admitting to struggling can feel risky. There may be fear of judgment, concern about career consequences, or simply denial based on beliefs that you should be able to handle the stress. This resistance is another reason why workplace culture matters so much. In environments where burnout is recognized and talking about struggles is normalized, people are more likely to acknowledge their experience and seek help earlier. In environments where struggling is stigmatized, burnout may progress further before being acknowledged, making recovery harder. Once burnout is recognized, the question becomes, what next? This brings us to the domains of recovery and prevention, which we'll explore in the next sections, considering both what helps individuals recover from existing burnout and what can prevent burnout from developing in the first place. Pathways to recovery. Treatment approaches for burnout. If you're experiencing burnout, what can help? What approaches have evidence for effectively addressing burnout and supporting recovery? The good news is that burnout is treatable. With appropriate interventions, most people can recover from burnout and return to satisfactory functioning. The less good news is that recovery typically requires changes at multiple levels: individual, relational, and organizational. And these changes aren't always easy to implement. Let's explore evidence-based treatment approaches, starting with interventions focused on the individual. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, has the strongest evidence base for treating burnout among psychotherapeutic approaches. CBT is a structured, problem-focused form of therapy that helps identify and change unhelpful patterns of thinking and behavior that contribute to psychological distress. In CBT for burnout, several specific techniques and focuses are common. One is cognitive restructuring, identifying distorted or unhelpful thoughts about work, yourself, or your situation, and developing more balanced, realistic perspectives. People with burnout often engage in patterns like catastrophizing, assuming the worst will happen, all-or-nothing thinking, believing that anything less than perfect is failure, or mind reading, assuming you know what others think, usually negatively. These thought patterns increase stress and undermine coping. For example, you might believe, "If I don't work through lunch and stay late every day, I'll fall irredeemably behind and my career will be ruined." CBT would help you examine this belief critically. Is it really true that you'll be irredeemably behind? What evidence supports and contradicts this? What would be a more balanced perspective? Perhaps something like, "I'm facing a heavy workload. Taking a lunch break might actually help me be more productive in the afternoon, and I can prioritize the most critical tasks if I can't finish everything." Another CBT focus in burnout treatment is behavioral activation, identifying activities that are meaningful, pleasurable, or aligned with your values, and intentionally engaging in them. When you're burned out, there's often a withdrawal from positive activities. You're too exhausted, you feel guilty taking time for yourself, or you've lost interest. But this withdrawal makes burnout worse because you lose sources of positive emotion, accomplishment, and meaning. Behavioral activation involves scheduling activities despite not feeling like doing them, recognizing that action often precedes motivation rather than following it. This might mean setting up a weekly dinner with a friend, signing up for an exercise class, engaging in a hobby you've neglected. The goal is to break the cycle of withdrawal and inactivity that perpetuates low mood and exhaustion. Problem solving is another important CBT component. Burnout often involves feeling stuck, overwhelmed by problems that seem unsolvable. CBT teaches systematic problem solving, clearly defining the problem, brainstorming possible solutions without immediately judging them, evaluating the pros and cons of different options, choosing and implementing a solution, and evaluating the outcome. For someone with burnout, problems might include excessive workload, conflicts with a supervisor, lack of control over your schedule, or difficulty saying no to additional responsibilities. Rather than feeling helpless in the face of these problems, systematic problem solving helps you identify potential actions, even if they're small or imperfect. Maybe you can't change everything about your work situation, but perhaps you can negotiate a deadline, delegate a task, or set a boundary around one particular demand. Assertiveness and communication skills training is often part of CBT for burnout. Many burned-out individuals struggle with boundary setting, with saying no, with advocating for their needs. They may engage in people-pleasing, overcommitment, or passive acceptance of unreasonable demands. Learning to communicate assertively, expressing your needs, limits, and feelings clearly and respectfully, can be transformative. Relaxation and stress management techniques are also typically taught in CBT for burnout. These include progressive muscle relaxation, deep breathing exercises, guided imagery, and other practices that help activate the parasympathetic nervous system and reduce physiological arousal. While these techniques alone won't cure burnout, they're valuable tools for managing acute stress and supporting recovery. Research on CBT for burnout shows that it can be effective in reducing burnout symptoms, particularly emotional exhaustion. A systematic review found that CBT led to clinically significant reductions in burnout in the majority of studies examined. The effects tend to be moderate in size and appear durable, with benefits persisting at follow-up assessments months after treatment ends. That said, CBT isn't a cure-all, and here's a finding that challenges what many organizations assume. CBT works better when combined with changes to work conditions. If someone receives excellent CBT but returns to the same toxic work environment with no changes, burnout is likely to recur. CBT provides tools for coping and changing your relationship to stressors, but it can't compensate for genuinely unsustainable work demands or lack of resources. This leads to a crucial insight from the research. Meta-analyses comparing the effectiveness of different types of burnout interventions have consistently found that organization-directed interventions, changes to work conditions, job design, workload, management practices, are more effective and longer-lasting than individual-focused interventions alone. Think about what this means. We live in a culture that emphasizes personal resilience, stress management skills, mindfulness, self-care. Billion-dollar wellness industries promise to help you cope better with stress. Yet the research shows that changing the workplace itself is more powerful than teaching individuals to be more resilient to bad workplaces. This doesn't mean individual interventions are useless. They're valuable and can help significantly. But the evidence suggests that asking, "How can workers become more resilient?" is less effective than asking, "How can we make workplaces less harmful?" The most effective approach combines both: individual support plus organizational change, addressing burnout at multiple levels simultaneously. Mindfulness-based interventions have also shown promise for burnout. Mindfulness involves paying attention to present moment experience with an attitude of openness, curiosity, and acceptance. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR, is a structured 8-week program that teaches various mindfulness practices, including meditation, body scans, and mindful movement. For burnout, mindfulness addresses several key processes. First, it helps with emotional regulation. By learning to observe emotions without immediately reacting to them or being overwhelmed by them, you develop greater emotional flexibility and resilience. Second, it reduces rumination, the repetitive, often negative thinking about problems and distress that is common in burnout and that perpetuates stress. Mindfulness helps you notice when you're ruminating and gently redirect attention to the present moment. Third, it can increase self-compassion, treating yourself with kindness rather than harsh self-criticism, which counters the self-blame and feelings of inadequacy common in burnout. Research on mindfulness-based interventions for burnout has generally found positive effects, with reductions in emotional exhaustion, improvements in well-being, and sometimes improvements in other burnout dimensions and related outcomes like stress, anxiety, and depression. However, the evidence is somewhat mixed, with some studies finding strong effects and others finding modest or non-significant effects. The effectiveness may depend on factors like how much participants actually practice mindfulness outside of formal sessions, their openness to the approach, and the specific program and delivery method. Acceptance and commitment. Therapy, or ACT, is another therapeutic approach with relevance to burnout. ACT emphasizes acceptance of difficult thoughts and feelings rather than struggling to eliminate them, clarifying personal values and committing to actions aligned with those values even in the presence of difficult internal experiences. For burnout, ACT can help in several ways. The acceptance component addresses the tendency to struggle against or be overwhelmed by exhaustion, frustration, or negative thoughts. rather than trying to force yourself to not be exhausted or not be cynical, which typically doesn't work and adds another layer of stress. ACT teaches accepting that these feelings are present while not letting them entirely dictate your actions. The values clarification component helps you reconnect with what matters to you. Burnout often involves a loss of meaning and purpose. By clarifying your core values, what you care about in work, relationships, personal growth, you can begin to align your actions with those values, even in small ways, which can restore some sense of meaning and direction. The commitment to valued action component means taking steps, however small, that move you toward the life you want, regardless of how you're feeling. This is similar to behavioral activation in CBT, but with more emphasis on values alignment. Even when you're exhausted and cynical, you can choose small actions that align with your values, which gradually helps shift your experience. Research on ACT for burnout is more limited than for CBT, but shows promising preliminary results. ACT interventions have been found to reduce burnout symptoms and improve psychological flexibility and well-being in several studies. Pharmacological treatment, medication, is not typically a first-line treatment for burnout itself, but it may be appropriate when burnout co-occurs with depression or anxiety disorders. Antidepressant medications, such as SSRIs, or anti-anxiety medications might be prescribed by a physician or psychiatrist to address these comorbid conditions. If burnout-related depression or anxiety is severe and interfering significantly with functioning, medication can be an important part of a comprehensive treatment plan, ideally combined with therapy and lifestyle changes. For sleep disturbances related to burnout, which are very common, improving sleep hygiene, establishing regular sleep and wake times, creating a conducive sleep environment, reducing screen time before bed, avoiding caffeine late in the day, is a first step. Sometimes cognitive behavioral therapy specifically for insomnia, or CBTI, is helpful. In some cases, sleep medications might be considered, though these are typically recommended for short-term use given potential for dependence or side effects. Beyond formal therapy, various individual strategies can support recovery from burnout. Taking time off from work, when possible, can provide the break needed for recovery. This might be a vacation, a medical leave, or a sabbatical. The key is that it needs to be true time off, where work demands are genuinely suspended, not just a working vacation where you're still checking email and attending calls. However, time off alone, while helpful, often isn't sufficient if you return to the same conditions that caused burnout. The recovery period provides a respite, but sustainable recovery requires changes that address the root causes. Physical activity and exercise have well-established benefits for mental health and stress reduction. Exercise reduces stress hormones, releases endorphins, improves sleep, and provides a sense of accomplishment. For someone with burnout, establishing a regular exercise routine, even something modest like daily walks, can be a valuable part of recovery. The challenge is that burnout-related exhaustion can make it hard to find energy for exercise, but often, once you start, you find that it actually increases energy rather than depleting it further. Social support is crucial for burnout recovery. This means having people in your life who provide emotional support, practical help, and a sense of connection. For some, this might mean leaning more on family and friends, letting them know you're struggling and accepting their support. For others, it might mean joining support groups, either in person or online, where you can connect with others who understand the experience of burnout. Some people find meaning and healing through creative activities, spiritual or religious practices, time in nature, or other pursuits that restore a sense of connection, purpose, and peace. These aren't treatments in a formal sense, but they can be important parts of a holistic recovery process. Professional coaching is another avenue that some people find helpful for burnout. While not therapy, coaching can help with goal setting, problem solving, developing coping strategies, and creating plans for change. Some research has found that professional coaching reduces burnout and improves well-being and resilience. While individual-focused interventions are important and can be very helpful, we must also emphasize the importance of organizational-level interventions for burnout. Meta-analyses comparing the effectiveness of different types of burnout interventions have consistently found that organization-directed interventions, changes to work conditions, job design, workload, management practices, are more effective and longer-lasting than individual-focused interventions alone. This makes sense when we remember that burnout is fundamentally a problem of work environments. Teaching individuals better coping skills is valuable, but if the work environment remains toxic or overwhelming, burnout will persist or recur. Effective organizational interventions for burnout might include workload reduction, improvements in staffing levels, increasing autonomy and control over work, providing training and resources to do the job effectively, implementing fair and transparent management practices, improving communication, fostering supportive workplace cultures, addressing conflicts and toxic behaviors, providing opportunities for professional development, and recognizing and rewarding employees' contributions. A comprehensive approach to burnout treatment ideally involves both individual support, therapy, skill building, self-care, and organizational changes that address these structural and environmental contributors to burnout. When both levels of intervention are present, outcomes are typically better than when only one level is addressed. Recovery from burnout is possible. With appropriate support and changes, people do recover, often gaining insights and developing strengths through the process. But recovery requires acknowledging the problem, seeking help, making changes, and having patience with the process, as it typically occurs gradually rather than suddenly. Building resilience, prevention, and sustainable work. While treatment for existing burnout is important, prevention is ideal. What can be done to prevent burnout from developing in the first place, to build resilience, and to create sustainable work practices? Prevention operates at multiple levels: individual strategies, relationship and community supports, and organizational practices and policies. Let's explore each level. At the individual level, research and clinical practice have identified various strategies that can help prevent burnout by building resources, managing demands, and maintaining well-being. While not all of these have been tested in rigorous randomized trials, they're consistently recommended by experts based on both theoretical foundations and observational evidence. Boundary setting is foundational and widely recognized in the burnout prevention literature. This means establishing clear separations between work and non-work time, learning to say no to unreasonable demands or requests that would stretch you too thin, and protecting time for rest and recovery. For many people, especially those who are conscientious and committed to their work, boundary setting is challenging. It can feel like letting people down or not meeting expectations. But without boundaries, demands will expand to fill all available time and energy, making burnout inevitable according to the demands resources framework we discussed earlier. Practical boundary setting might include not checking work email after a certain hour or on weekends, taking full lunch breaks away from your desk, using all of your vacation time, and declining additional responsibilities when your plate is already full. It also means mental boundaries, practicing psychological detachment from work during non-work hours, not ruminating about work problems when you're trying to relax or sleep. Time management and prioritization skills help manage workload more effectively. This includes identifying what tasks are truly most important and urgent, what can be delegated or eliminated, and what can be deferred. It means being realistic about how much can be accomplished in available time rather than overcommitting. Tools like to-do lists, calendars, and project management systems can help, but the underlying skill is making conscious choices about where to direct time and attention. Self-care practices are essential for sustaining well-being. This is not about occasional spa days, though those can be nice. It's about daily practices that support your physical and mental health. Adequate sleep, prioritizing 7 to 9 hours per night for most adults, is foundational. Poor sleep undermines everything else. Regular physical activity, even moderate amounts, provides stress relief and health benefits. Balanced nutrition supports both physical health and mood. Meaningful social connections, maintaining relationships with family and friends, provide emotional support and perspective. Engaging in activities you enjoy and find meaningful, whether hobbies, creative pursuits, volunteering, or spending time in nature, replenishes emotional resources. Self-awareness, regularly checking in with yourself about how you're feeling, what you're experiencing, what you need, helps you recognize early warning signs of stress or burnout before they progress. This might involve journaling, meditation, or simply taking a few moments each day to reflect. When you notice signs like increased irritability, difficulty sleeping, or declining motivation, you can respond proactively rather than waiting until burnout is severe. Cognitive strategies can support resilience. This includes cultivating optimism, looking for positive aspects and opportunities even in challenges, viewing setbacks as temporary and specific rather than permanent and pervasive. It includes practicing gratitude, regularly noting things you're grateful for, which shifts attention toward positive aspects of experience. It includes maintaining perspective, reminding yourself that work, while important, is not the entirety of your identity or worth, that mistakes and imperfect performances are human and not catastrophic. Meaning-making, connecting your work to larger purposes or values, can be protective. When you understand how your work contributes to something you care about, whether helping others, creating something valuable, supporting causes you believe in, it provides intrinsic motivation and resilience in the face of challenges. Even in jobs that don't seem inherently meaningful, you can often find meaning in aspects like the relationships with colleagues, the learning and growth you're experiencing, or how the income supports other goals. Recovery and rest between work periods is crucial. This means daily recovery, truly disconnecting from work in the evenings, getting adequate sleep. It means weekly recovery, having days off where you're not working. It means periodic longer recoveries, vacations where you completely unplug from work. Research on recovery shows that it's not just time away from work that matters, but the quality of that time. Truly detaching psychologically, engaging in activities you enjoy, having control over how you spend your time, and connecting with others all enhance recovery. Developing multiple domains of investment in life. Work is one important domain, but also relationships, health, hobbies, community involvement, personal growth creates balance and resilience. When your sense of self and worth is entirely tied to work, any struggles at work become existential crises. When you have a multifaceted life, work setbacks, while still unpleasant, don't undermine your entire sense of self. At the relational and community level, social support is one of the most important protective factors against burnout. This includes both work-based support, having positive relationships with colleagues, having a supportive supervisor, feeling part of a team, and support outside of work from family and friends. Practically, building social support might mean intentionally nurturing relationships with colleagues, perhaps through informal lunch gatherings or post-work activities. It might mean seeking out mentors or being a mentor to others, creating relationships where support and guidance flow in both directions. It might mean joining professional organizations or communities where you can connect with others in your field. It also means not isolating when you're struggling. Burnout often creates an impulse to withdraw. but isolation makes burnout worse. Reaching out, letting people know you're having a hard time, accepting offers of help, these can feel vulnerable but are crucial for recovery and resilience. Peer support programs, where employees connect with one another for mutual support, have shown promise in some workplace settings. These create structured opportunities for employees to share experiences, problem-solve together, and feel less alone in their struggles. At the organizational level, prevention of burnout requires proactive attention to work design and workplace culture. Employers have both ethical and practical reasons to prevent burnout in their workforce. Ethically, they have a duty to provide safe, healthy working conditions. Practically, burnout harms organizational functioning through reduced productivity, increased errors, higher turnover, and associated costs. Effective organizational prevention strategies address the job demands resources balance we discussed earlier. This means managing workloads so they're challenging but realistic, not chronically overwhelming. It means adequate staffing so that work can be distributed fairly. It means realistic productivity expectations that account for human limits. It means providing employees with autonomy, control over how they do their work, when they do it, flexibility in managing their schedules. Research consistently shows that autonomy is one of the most important resources for preventing burnout. It means ensuring that employees have the resources they need to do their jobs effectively, adequate training, appropriate tools and technology, access to information and support. When employees are set up to fail by lacking necessary resources, burnout follows. It means creating opportunities for professional development and growth, so employees don't feel stuck or stagnant. This might include training, programs, mentorship, pathways for advancement, or opportunities to take on new challenges aligned with their interests. It means implementing fair and transparent processes for decisions about workload distribution, promotions, compensation, and other important matters. Perceptions of fairness and justice are strongly protective against burnout. It means recognizing and rewarding employees' contributions, both through formal compensation and benefits, and through informal acknowledgement and appreciation. People need to feel that their efforts are noticed and valued. It means fostering positive workplace cultures where respect, collaboration, and psychological safety are prioritized. This includes not tolerating toxic behaviors like bullying, harassment, or discrimination. It includes encouraging open communication where employees feel they can raise concerns without fear of retaliation. It includes creating communities within the workplace where people feel connected and supported. Leadership and management training is crucial. Managers significantly influence the work experience of their direct reports. Training managers to recognize signs of burnout, to have supportive conversations with struggling employees, to manage workload fairly, to provide appropriate feedback and support. These can meaningfully impact burnout rates in their teams. Flexible work arrangements, remote work options, flexible hours, compressed work weeks, job sharing, can help employees better balance work and life demands, reducing work-life conflict and providing greater control. Employee assistance programs that provide confidential counseling and support services give employees resources for addressing personal or work-related problems before they escalate to burnout. Regular assessment of employee well-being through surveys or other means allows organizations to monitor burnout levels, identify high-risk groups or areas, and evaluate whether interventions are effective. Importantly, organizational prevention of burnout requires leadership commitment. It can't be just an HR initiative or something delegated to a wellness committee. Leaders must prioritize employee well-being, model healthy work practices themselves, allocate resources to prevention efforts, and hold themselves and other leaders accountable for creating healthy work environments. Some organizations have implemented structural changes specifically aimed at reducing burnout. In healthcare settings, this has included things like schedule changes to reduce consecutive long shifts, scribes to reduce physicians' documentation burden, or team-based care models that distribute workload. In other settings, it might include things like no meeting days to allow focused work time, mandatory time off between intensive project periods, or workload audits that identify and address unsustainable demands. Prevention is more effective and less costly than treatment. Building resilient individuals and organizations that prevent burnout in the first place is the ideal. This requires sustained attention to creating conditions for sustainable work that challenges and engages people without depleting and breaking them, work that allows for both high performance and sustained well-being. Creating such conditions is not simple or quick. It requires genuine commitment, resources, and ongoing attention. But it's possible, and organizations that do it well benefit through more engaged, productive, healthy employees who stay longer and contribute more effectively. For individuals, prevention means taking your well-being seriously, not as a luxury but as a necessity. It means recognizing that you can't sustainably give from an empty cup, that self-care is not selfish but necessary for sustained contribution. It means being proactive in setting boundaries, seeking support, and making choices that support your health even when those choices feel difficult. The truth about burnout, what your exhaustion is really telling you. We've traveled a long path together tonight, from Freudenberger's observations in a 1970s free clinic to the latest neuroscience of stress, from the 3 dimensions of burnout to its prevention and treatment. But there's one more insight to share, perhaps the most important one, and it recontextualizes everything we've discussed. Throughout this exploration, we've seen a pattern emerge again and again. Let me trace it for you. Freudenberger noticed burnout struck the most dedicated volunteers, not the careless ones. Research on personality found that conscientiousness, the trait that makes you excel, can become your vulnerability when demands exceed resources. We discovered that your body's cortisol response amplifies initially, working harder to help you cope, but then eventually shuts down when stress continues unabated. Studies showed that cynicism, which looks like callousness, is actually a protective mechanism, your psyche's desperate attempt to preserve what's left of itself. We learned that organizational interventions outperform individual resilience training, suggesting the problem isn't primarily in individuals. And we saw that burnout costs more than many nations' GDP, affecting not just individuals, but entire societies. What do all these pieces tell us when we put them together? Here's the revelation that changes everything. Burnout is not a disorder. It's a signal. It's not a personal failing. It's feedback. It's not about individuals being inadequate. It's about situations being unsustainable. Think about what we learned about your biology. When you first face sustained stress, your HPA axis activates. Cortisol rises, trying to give you energy to meet demands. Your body is helping you. But if the stress continues without relief, research shows that cortisol production eventually becomes blunted or dysregulated. This isn't your body failing you. This is your body protecting you. When you won't stop, voluntarily, when dedication or responsibility or fear keeps you pushing through sustainable limits, your biology eventually forces the issue. The exhaustion, the inability to care anymore, the reduced performance, these aren't failures. They're your system's emergency brake. Consider depersonalization, that cold detachment that develops toward the people you're supposed to serve or care about. We described it as a defense mechanism, but look deeper. It's information. Your psyche is telling you that continuing to care at the level being demanded will destroy you. The cynicism isn't you losing your values, it's your mind protecting you from being consumed by unsustainable emotional labor. Remember the three dimensions creating vicious cycles? Exhaustion leading to reduced efficacy, leading to more stress, leading to more exhaustion? That looks like a downward spiral, but here's another way to understand it. Each worsening cycle is your system escalating its alarm. First, it whispers, "You're just tired." Then it speaks louder, "You're making mistakes." Then it shouts, "You can't do this anymore." The progression isn't random. It's graduated warnings, getting more severe until you're forced to pay attention. Now recall what we learned about who gets burnout. Not the uncommitted, the dedicated. Not those who care too little, those who care too much. Not the incompetent, the conscientious. This pattern reveals something crucial. Burnout doesn't strike people who aren't trying. It strikes people who are trying too hard in situations that aren't designed to be sustainable. And remember the organizational research. The finding that workplace changes outperform individual resilience training? That's not because resilience training doesn't work. It's because when the problem is in the system, teaching individuals to tolerate bad systems better is addressing the wrong level. The fact that changing workplaces is more effective than changing workers' coping skills tells us where the primary problem lies. When we understand burnout this way, it transforms everything. Your exhaustion isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Your body knows you can't sustain this pace, even if your mind hasn't accepted it yet. Your cynicism isn't callousness, it's self-preservation. Your psyche is pulling back from unsustainable emotional demands because continuing to fully invest would annihilate you. Your reduced efficacy isn't incompetence, it's reality. You're not performing at your peak because performing at your peak indefinitely without adequate resources isn't humanly possible. The research showing that 89% of workers experience burnout symptoms, that's not a pandemic of individual weakness. That's a systemic problem revealing itself through individual bodies and minds. When half of all workers are burning out, the workers aren't failing the workplaces are failing the workers. The trillion-dollar economic cost? That's not just lost, productivity. That's the price we pay as a society for organizing work in ways that exceed human capacity. Every burned-out worker is a data point showing us where our systems are broken. This is why Freudenberger observed burnout in himself while documenting it in others. He was experiencing what he was studying. His exhaustion and cynicism weren't personal failures. They were accurate feedback about the unsustainability of running a free clinic with inadequate resources while maintaining a private practice and conducting research. The burnout was information. This isn't sustainable. Something must change. But here's what's both troubling and liberating about this reframing. If burnout is feedback rather than disorder, then the appropriate response isn't just treatment, it's change. Not just individual change, though boundaries and self-care matter. Systemic change, organizational change, structural change. When your smoke alarm goes off, you don't just remove the battery and call it solved, you find the fire. Burnout is your internal smoke alarm. The question is whether you'll address what's burning. For individuals, this means recognizing that when you're burning out, you're not the problem. The situation exceeds your capacity, not because you're inadequate, but because the situation is unsustainable. Your recovery involves not just treating symptoms, but addressing root causes, which might mean changing jobs, setting different boundaries, reducing hours, or fundamentally restructuring how you work. For organizations, this means recognizing that employee burnout is organizational feedback. When your people are burning out, they're not failing to be resilient enough. They're showing you, through their exhaustion and cynicism, that your demands exceed what humans can sustainably give. They're paying with their health to deliver information you need about your systems. For society, this means recognizing that epidemic-level burnout is structural feedback. When half of workers report burnout symptoms, when stress-related disease is a leading cause of death, when productivity losses exceed the GDP of most nations, this is our collective systems telling us they're not designed around human needs and human limits. The question becomes, will we listen to the feedback? Or will we keep treating burnout as an individual problem, medicating the symptoms while leaving the causes intact? Freudenberger, experiencing burnout while studying burnout, faced this choice. So does every burned-out worker today. So does every organization with high burnout rates. So do we, collectively, as a society. The smoke alarm is ringing. We know where the fire is. The research has been clear for 50 years. The question isn't whether we can address burnout. We know how. The question is whether we'll do what it requires. Not just teaching people to tolerate unsustainable conditions better, but making conditions sustainable in the first place. Your exhaustion is not your failure. It's your wisdom. Listen to it. Finding your way forward. If you're experiencing burnout right now, let me return to where we started. Remember those volunteers at Freudenberger's clinic, transforming from passionate idealists into exhausted, cynical shadows of themselves? Remember how their stress hormones were suppressed rather than elevated, suggesting their bodies had essentially shut down their stress response? That seemed like failure when we opened this discussion. But now you understand what it actually was. Their biology protecting them, forcing them to stop when dedication and idealism wouldn't let them stop voluntarily. The suppressed cortisol wasn't weakness. It was their body's last resort intervention to prevent complete collapse. You might be in that same place now. And if you are, here's what I hope you understand after tonight. You're not weak. You're not failing. Your exhaustion, your cynicism, your declining performance, these aren't character flaws. They're signals. They're feedback about a mismatch between what's being demanded and what's sustainable. The question isn't, how do I push through this? The question is, what is this trying to tell me? Maybe it's telling you that boundaries need to be set. Maybe it's telling you that this role, as currently structured, isn't sustainable for you. Maybe it's telling you that the organization needs to change. Maybe it's telling you that this career path isn't aligned with your well-being. Only you can interpret the specific message of your specific burnout. But the message is there, if you'll listen instead of just trying to silence it. Recovery is possible, with acknowledgement, support, treatment when needed, and most importantly, with changes to address root causes. People do recover from burnout. They find more sustainable ways of working. They rebuild their energy. They reconnect with meaning. They restore their sense of efficacy. Sometimes recovery means staying in your role, but with different boundaries or organizational supports. Sometimes it means changing roles or organizations. Sometimes it means fundamental life changes. There's no single right path, but there are paths forward. Once you stop treating burnout as something to overcome and start treating it as information to honor. For those who haven't experienced severe burnout, perhaps tonight has given you new understanding. Perhaps you'll recognize when your own body and mind start sending signals, and you'll respond earlier before reaching crisis. Perhaps you'll understand colleagues or loved ones who are struggling. Perhaps you'll advocate differently in your workplace, recognizing that employee well-being isn't just about individual resilience, but about creating sustainable conditions. The story that began with Freudenberger's observations in 1974 continues today. 50 years later, we know so much more. We understand the biology, the psychology, the organizational factors. We have evidence-based treatments. We have prevention frameworks. The knowledge exists. But knowledge alone doesn't change systems. Application does. Individuals taking that knowledge and making changes in their lives. Organizations restructuring work around human capacity rather than demanding unlimited productivity. Society recognizing that when half of workers are burning out, the problem isn't in the workers. Freudenberger documented burnout while experiencing it himself. He faced a choice: push through and potentially break completely, or listen to the feedback and make changes. He chose to listen. He adjusted how he worked. He survived his burnout and went on to help countless others understand theirs. You face a similar choice now. Your smoke alarm is ringing. Maybe quietly, maybe loudly, but it's giving you information. The question is whether you will silence it or address what's burning. Thank you for spending this time exploring burnout with me tonight. If you found value in this deep exploration, if you'd like more content that takes psychological topics seriously and explores them with both rigor and compassion, I invite you to like and subscribe. Your support makes these long-form, research-based explorations possible. But more than subscribing to this channel, I hope you'll subscribe to a different idea. The idea that you deserve work that doesn't consume you, that your exhaustion deserves to be taken seriously, and that listening to your body's and mind's signals isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Take care of yourself, not as an afterthought or luxury, but as a fundamental necessity. Be gentle with yourself. Listen to what your exhaustion is telling you. And remember, you're not broken. The situation might be, and situations can change. Until next time, rest well. You've earned it.